I wasn't invited to my brother's wedding. My own family called it a tough cut, like I was just another name on the guest list. So, I smiled, packed a bag, and flew to Hawaii, sunshine, waves, peace. I told myself I didn't care. But, on the morning of his wedding, while sipping coffee on my balcony, my phone began to buzz. TikTok. The first video showed the bride sobbing mascara running makeup ruined. The next clip, my brother yelling my name in front of hundreds of guests. Then, someone shouted, "She did this," and my notifications exploded. Within minutes, I went from invisible to infamous. The internet called me a jealous sister, a homewrecker, a ghost who ruined a perfect wedding without even being there. And then, the phone calls started. First my mother, then my brother. Then, someone I hadn't heard from in years, a voice whispering, "They set you up." I thought escaping to paradise would free me. But the truth was just beginning to surface, and when it did, every lie my family ever told was going to drown with it. Stay until the end, you won't believe who was behind it all. My name is Brooke Walsh. I'm 34 years old and work as an interior designer in Portland. I've built a quiet, steady life, small apartment, loyal clients, a good cup of coffee every morning before I open my laptop. People often describe me as calm, patient, dependable. I used to think those were compliments. Lately, they've begun to sound like excuses for being overlooked. The day I realised my brother's wedding was happening without me began like any other Tuesday. I was working on colour palettes for a client when I heard my mother's voice through the speakerphone. She had forgotten again that she had called me accidentally instead of Jason. Her voice carried that high, excited tone she used only for him. "The rehearsal dinner will be at the Lakeside Club," she said. "And the venue, oh, Jason, the venue is stunning. Everyone's going to be so impressed." I froze the paintbrush in my hand, dripping onto the sketch pad. She didn't notice I was on the line. She never did. I listened as she spoke about guest lists, the band, how Emma's family was simply lovely. My stomach tightened. Not once did I hear my name. "No, your sister will love it," or "Brooke can help with the design." Nothing. Just my mother's world revolving, as always, around her golden sun. When I hung up, I stared at the muted phone and told myself not to take it personally. Maybe it was just an oversight. Maybe my invitation was on its way. I walked to the mailbox that afternoon feeling slightly foolish, but still hopeful. Empty, the next day the same. On Friday, when the mail carrier smiled and said, "Quiet day for you," I laughed like it didn't matter, even as the knot in my chest pulled tighter. By the end of the week, I began inventing excuses for them. Maybe Emma wanted a small wedding. Maybe they were still finalising numbers. Maybe. But deep down, I knew the truth in my family. I was always the afterthought. That realisation brought me back to a memory I'd buried years ago. Thanksgiving dinner 4 years earlier. My mother sat at the head of the table, Jason on her right, Emma glowing beside him. I'd just finished telling them that one of my designs had been featured in a magazine, a big milestone for me. My mother smiled vaguely, then turned to Jason and said, "Did you hear what the senior partner told me? They're thinking of giving you the lead on that new project." Everyone cheered. The conversation moved on without me. I remember sitting there smiling politely, cutting my turkey into perfect squares, while a voice inside whispered, "You'll never be enough for them." I pushed that voice away for years, but standing in my kitchen, now the same ache returning, I could almost hear my father's voice, too soft, kind the one person who saw me. "You don't need their approval to know your worth, Brookie," he used to say. He'd been gone 5 years, and with him went the balance in our family. After he passed, my mother's attention narrowed to Jason like a beam of light, and I faded into the background. Still, I waited. Every day, I checked my mailbox, my email, the family group chat that rarely included me. When I finally saw an unread message from Walsh Family Wedding, my heart skipped. I clicked it open already, imagining an apology for the delay, maybe a warm note from my brother. It wasn't that. "Hi, Brooke," it began. We're so sorry, but with the final head count and venue limits, we had to make some tough cuts. Please know we love you and wish you could be there. Hope you understand. Emma and Jason. Tough cuts. That's what they called it. As if family were an optional expense. I reread the line until the words blurred. My hand went cold around the mouse and I heard my mother's laughter from that phone call echo in my mind, sharp and bright. I closed the laptop slowly. My apartment was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. I walked to the window, looked out at the rainy Portland street and wondered how love could feel so lopsided for so long without breaking. I thought of my father's voice again. Be kind, but don't be small. That night, I poured a glass of wine and sat on the couch trying to decide if I should call them demand an explanation or just stop trying. But before I could make that choice, my email notification dinged again. The subject line read, "Sorry, Brooke. It's just a tough cut." I sat there for a long time after that, staring at the screen, the words floating like static in my head. My wine had gone warm on the table beside me. Outside, the rain had turned to a mist that smeared the streetlights into watery halos. That was Portland, soft grey, endlessly polite, just like me. I wanted to be angry, to slam something, to scream, but I didn't. I closed the laptop instead, the sound of it snapping shut, too gentle for how I felt. Over the next few days, I moved through life on autopilot. I went to work, smiled at clients, returned emails. My studio was small, but beautiful light spilling through the big front window, the scent of fresh wood and paint always lingering in the air. People came to me for calm, for order, for the kind of home they wanted to come back to. I gave them that. I made beauty for other people even when mine felt like it was slipping away. Friday afternoon, my mother called. Her voice, as always, was full of energy that had nothing to do with me. Jason got the promotion, she said, before I could even say hello. Senior project manager. Can you believe it? They told him he's the youngest in the firm's history. I pressed the phone tighter to my ear. That's great, I said softly, trying to sound sincere. I just knew he'd get it, she went on. He's been working so hard. Emma's over the moon. They might upgrade their honeymoon now, maybe Europe instead of the Bahamas. I could picture her sitting at the kitchen table, twisting the phone cord like she used to, her face glowing with pride. For Jason, there was always a glow. For me, just a flicker of polite interest, the way you'd look at something you'd already decided not to buy. I'm really happy for him, I said. There was a pause. And you? She asked absently. How's your little business going? It's doing well, I said. Actually, I just signed a new client, a local gallery. They want me to redesign their exhibit space. It could be a good connection. Oh, that's nice, she replied, her tone already drifting. Anyway, Jason says the firm's giving him a bonus. He might finally buy that car he's been talking about. Isn't that wonderful? That's wonderful, I echoed, staring at the paint samples spread across my desk. This was our rhythm. Jason's victories were headlines. Mine were footnotes. I had long stopped expecting applause. Still, something about the way she said your little business made the word stick like a splinter. I used to think I didn't mind. I told myself I was above it, independent, self-sufficient. But the truth was, I wanted her to look at me the way she looked at him, with that unguarded pride that made her whole face soften. When we hung up, I sat there listening to the quiet hum of my studio. Outside, a couple walked past, their laughter, muffled by the glass. For a moment, I thought about calling Jason to congratulate him myself. But I knew what he'd say, something half distracted, maybe grateful, maybe not. He loved me in that distant, polite way people love the relatives they see at Christmas and forget by New Year's. That night, I was supposed to meet my friend Melissa for dinner, but I cancelled. I told her I had a deadline, but really I just didn't have the energy to pretend I was fine. I made tea instead, curled up on the couch, and scrolled through social media. There they were, my family. My mother had posted a photo of her and Jason at a fancy restaurant, champagne glasses, raised high, captioned, "So proud of my boy." Emma had commented with a string of hearts. I felt that old ache rise again, the one that made me feel 12 years old and invisible. I typed out a comment. "Congrats, Jason. So proud of you too," then deleted it. It felt too small, too desperate. I set the phone down and leaned back. I thought about all the years I tried to be easy. The child who didn't complain, the sister who stepped aside, the daughter who kept her voice soft so no one had to raise theirs. It had been my role for so long it had almost become my identity. But that night, sitting alone in the quiet, I realised something I'd never said out loud being easy hadn't earned me love. It had only made me invisible. A week later, my mother invited me over for dinner. Just family, she said, which apparently still included me, when there wasn't a guest list to trim. I brought a bottle of wine dressed nicely, but not too nicely. The house smelled like roast chicken and lemon polish, the same as it had when I was a kid. Jason was already there, smiling relaxed. "Hey sis," he said, giving me a quick hug. He smelled like expensive cologne and confidence. Emma sat beside him, scrolling through her phone. Dinner began with the usual chatter. My mother couldn't stop bragging about Jason's promotion. "You should have seen his boss," she said, eyes bright. "Told him he's the backbone of the company. And to think just a few years ago he was still figuring out what he wanted to do." I smiled, cutting into my chicken. "That's great," I said. Jason grinned modestly. "Thanks. It's been a good year." I tried to join in. "Actually, I've been working on a new project too." A gallery downtown hired me to redesign their main exhibit space. "It's a pretty big deal for me." "That's nice," dear, my mother said, not looking up as she reached for the gravy. "You've always been creative." Then she turned back to Jason. "So, about that car you're buying, did you decide on the colour?" I watched them talk, her face glowing with pride, his with easy confidence. Emma chimed in now and then, laughing at their jokes. I sat there, my fork motionless, and felt the familiar mix of warmth and cold that family brings, the longing to belong, and the quiet knowledge that you don't. When dinner ended, my mother hugged me distractedly at the door. "Drive safe, honey," she said. Jason patted my shoulder like a polite acquaintance. In the car, I sat for a moment before turning the key. The streetlights blurred through the windshield, and for the first time, I didn't feel sad. I felt empty, and underneath that emptiness, something else. Something alive. Back home, I opened my laptop. The email about the wedding was still in my inbox, sitting there like a wound that hadn't closed. I read it again, slower this time, letting the words hit where they wanted to. "Sorry, Brooke. It's just a tough cut. A tough cut. That's what my family had done, trimmed me out like an unnecessary line in a script. Maybe I had been written small for so long that they forgot I could take up space." I closed the laptop gently, the reflection of my face fading in the dark screen. My voice sounded strange in the stillness, but steady. Maybe it's time I stopped waiting for an invitation. Those words echoed in my apartment long after I'd said them. They didn't sound angry or rebellious, just quiet like a truth that had been waiting for years to be spoken aloud. I remember sitting there that night, my laptop dark, the rain pattering softly against the window, feeling something inside me unclench for the first time in a long while. Not happiness, not yet, but release. I didn't have to keep asking for a place at a table that had never truly been set for me. The next morning, I went back to my studio. It was early, the city still grey and half asleep. I unlocked the door and let the soft light spill across the wooden floors. The air smelled faintly of lemon oil and fresh paint, a scent that always made me feel grounded. My design studio wasn't big, but it was mine. 2 rooms, 1 assistant, and walls covered in swatches. Sketches and photographs of finished spaces I'd transformed. Clean lines, natural textures, light that felt like it could breathe. I loved that kind of beauty, the kind that didn't demand attention, but offered quiet comfort instead. By 8, my assistant and friend Claire arrived holding 2 coffees and a bag of muffins. "You look tired," she said, handing me one. "Late night, just thinking," I said. "Dangerous habit." She smiled. Claire was younger than me, full of the kind of optimism I'd misplaced somewhere around 30. Big day, she added, glancing at the schedule board. 2 consultations and the final walkthrough with the Parkers. The Parkers were an older couple whose lake house I'd been redesigning for months. They'd wanted a place that felt like the inside of a sigh, as Mrs. Parker had put it. When I'd shown her the finished mock-ups, she'd cried. That kind of reaction always surprised me, the way spaces could touch people so deeply. By mid-morning, the studio was buzzing softly. Clients came and went, complimenting the work, making small talk. I guided them through textures, colours and light, my voice steady and practiced. People often said my designs had a calmness to them. I think that was because I put all my chaos into the work, so the rooms themselves could stay peaceful. When the Parkers left, glowing and grateful, Claire turned to me. "You know, you've really built something here." I shrugged, smiling a little. "Something small." "Small?" She laughed. "Brooke, you've got a 6-month wait list. People call you the quiet miracle worker. You did this all on your own. No investors, no partners, no favours. That's not small." Her words made me pause. I hadn't thought of it like that in a long time. For years, I'd measured my worth against the yardstick my family had built titles, houses, applause. But in this little studio, surrounded by fabric and wood and light, I'd built something that was mine. No one had handed it to me. I had earned it piece by piece. After lunch, the studio emptied out. Claire left early to meet her boyfriend, and the quiet felt almost too still. I sat by the window watching people hurry by outside. Couples holding hands, a mother and child laughing, an old man carrying groceries. I thought about my own life, simple, orderly, full of work and calm. It wasn't lonely exactly, but it wasn't full either. I remembered my father then, like I often did when the quiet got too deep. He'd been gone 5 years, but sometimes his voice still came back so clearly, it felt like he was in the room. He was a gentle man, bookish, kind not as ambitious as my mother wanted him to be. I used to sit beside him while he worked in his study, sketching designs in the margins of his newspaper. He'd look over my shoulder and smile. "You don't need their praise to know your worth, Brookie," he once told me. "If you do good work and live honestly, that's enough." At the time, I thought he was just being kind. Now I understood he'd been giving me armour. He'd seen how my mother's sharp tongue and Jason's easy charm could make me feel small even as a child. He'd wanted me to know I didn't have to earn love the way they made it seem. The memory hit me with a mix of warmth and ache. I missed him. I missed having someone who saw me without needing me to prove I was worth seeing. When I got home that evening, the silence followed me in like an old friend. I heated up leftover soup, sat on the couch, and tried to read. But my mind kept drifting back to that phrase. Stop waiting for an invitation. I realised it applied to more than just the wedding. It was about my life. I'd been waiting for permission to rest, to take a vacation, to do something spontaneous. I couldn't remember the last time I'd done something purely for myself. The next morning, I arrived at the studio early again. Claire was already there, flipping through her phone. "Morning," she said cheerfully. "You look like you slept better." "I did," I said, and it was partly true. She grinned. "Good, because I've got something fun to show you." She spun her laptop around. "Look at this travel deals. Hawaii's on sale this month. Flights, hotels, everything. It's like the universe is begging people to take a break." I laughed. "Hawaii? That's a little far for a weekend trip." "Who said weekend?" she teased. "You've been glued to this studio for months. You could use some peace. Sun, salt water, a tan that's not from the light of your laptop screen." I rolled my eyes, but something about her words stirred something inside me. Peace. That word again. My whole life I'd chased quiet. Maybe it was time to go where quiet wasn't forced, where it came naturally. Claire leaned her chin on her hand. "You always take care of everyone else. Maybe it's time to take care of you. Hawaii's on sale. Maybe that's where you'll find peace." Her words stayed with me long after she left for the evening. Peace. It sounded like something far away, almost foreign. Still that night, I found myself scrolling through pictures of Hawaii on my laptop, the kind of images you see in travel ads, where the water looks unreal and time seems to move slower. It was ridiculous, I thought. People like me didn't just take off for paradise. I had clients' bills and life that needed me to keep it steady. And yet, I kept looking. It was while clicking through an article about travel restrictions that I saw something that made my breath catch. A headline: local couple to wed on June 14th. An elegant affair. The names jumped out at me. Jason Walsh and Emma Peterson, my brother and his fiancé. But what stopped me wasn't their names. It was the date. June 14th, my father's birthday. For a moment, I just stared at it, certain I was mistaken. I whispered it out loud as if hearing it might change it. June 14th. My chest tightened. Of all the days they could have chosen, they picked that one. My father's day. The man who'd been the glue that held us together, who had loved us quietly and without favourites. And they were turning his day into a spectacle of everything he had despised: vanity, showmanship, pretense. I sat there for a long time, my hands resting on the keyboard, staring at the screen until the letters blurred. It wasn't just thoughtlessness. It felt like a message. A reminder that the pieces of him that lived in me, his gentleness, his steadiness, didn't count anymore. The phone rang just then, sharp and familiar. My mother's name glowed on the screen. For a second, I considered letting it go to voicemail, but I answered. "Hi, Mum. Brooke, dear," she said, her tone brisk, almost cheerful. "I wanted to make sure you got the invitation." I froze. The invitation? "Oh, not a formal one. Of course," she said quickly. "Jason mentioned you were upset and I told him you wouldn't make a scene. It's just that, with the venue limits and Emma's family, well, you know how these things go." "I know," I said, softly. "You already explained." She sighed, as though I were the one being unreasonable. "Please, Brooke, don't take it personally. It's not about you." "Not about me," I repeated. "You're holding the wedding on Dad's birthday." There was silence for a beat too long. Then, "Oh, Brooke, really must you make everything sentimental? Your father's been gone for years. It's a date, that's all." I could almost see her sitting in that immaculate kitchen, a glass of white wine beside her, waving off my words like dust. "You could have chosen any weekend," I said. My voice stayed calm, though my hands trembled. "Any date. You chose that one." "Emma wanted June," she replied, "and it was the only Saturday that worked with the venue." "Honestly, Brooke, it's not the end of the world. You've always been so sensitive about things." There it was. The old wound reopened with surgical precision. Sensitive. The word she used whenever she wanted to make me feel foolish for caring. "Mum," I said quietly, "do you ever stop to think how it feels to be on the outside of everything?" "I'm not having this conversation," she said quickly. "Jason's under enough pressure as it is. I just called to ask that you handle this gracefully. Don't make this about yourself." Something inside me shifted at that. For years, I'd let her words shape me. I'd bent, softened, disappeared, all in the name of being the good daughter. But now hearing her say those words, "Don't make this about yourself," I realised how tired I was of being edited out of my own life. I smiled, though she couldn't see it. "Don't worry, Mum," I said gently. "I won't make it about myself." She seemed relieved. "Good. I knew you'd understand. You've always been my sensible one." We hung up, and the quiet afterward felt heavy. I sat there staring at the soft glow of my laptop screen, still open to the Hawaii travel site. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. It wasn't an impulse. It wasn't rebellion. It was clarity. I opened a new tab, found a beachfront villa in Maui, white sand ocean view quiet enough that you could hear the waves even from the bed. I scrolled through the photos, slowly feeling something inside me settle. The price made me hesitate for a second, but then I thought of my father again, his voice soft and steady in my mind. "You don't need their praise to know your worth." I clicked book now. It wasn't about running away. It was about reclaiming something I'd forgotten how to hold my peace. The confirmation email came through instantly, bright and definite. June 14th through June 20th. I smiled at the coincidence. I'd spend my father's birthday by the sea the way he used to dream about when he talked of retiring. Maybe that was the real way to honour him, not with tears but with silence and salt air. Over the next few days, I prepared quietly. I finished my client work ahead of schedule, told Claire I'd be gone for a week. She grinned like she'd been waiting for this moment. "About time," she said. "You're going to love it there." At home, I began to pack. My suitcase sat open on the bed, the air thick with the scent of fabric softener and cedar from the closet. I folded some dresses I hadn't worn in years, tucked in sandals, a wide-brimmed hat, my father's old leather-bound journal. I slipped in a photo of him too, the one where he's smiling at the camera, the ocean behind him. As I packed, I felt something I hadn't felt in months come. Not the numb kind, but the steady, grounded calm that comes when you know you're doing the right thing for yourself, even if no one else understands it. When I zipped the suitcase shut, it sounded like punctuation, a period at the end of a long, silent sentence. I turned off the lights, crawled into bed, and stared at the ceiling. My phone buzzed once on the nightstand. A new message from my mother. "Promise you won't do anything dramatic." That was the last message my mother sent before I turned off my phone for the night. Her words lingered like a faint stain, sharp, condescending, and oddly predictable. I didn't reply. For once, I didn't feel the need to defend myself, to explain that leaving wasn't drama, it was survival. I placed the phone face down on the nightstand, turned off the light, and let the quiet wrap around me. It was the kind of silence that used to make me feel lonely. That night, it felt like freedom waiting just beyond the dark. The next morning, I woke before sunrise. The world outside was still grey, the city half asleep. I brewed coffee and stood by the window, watching a light drizzle blur the glass. It felt fitting, Portland saying its quiet goodbye in the only language it knew. My suitcase waited by the door, small and practical like me. For a second, I hesitated. Years of habit made me question if I should go at all. What would people think? Would my mother spin it into another story about my fragility? I caught my reflection in the window and smiled. I didn't care anymore. I was tired of shaping myself into something palatable for people who didn't even taste the effort. At the airport, the usual chaos surrounded me, rolling suitcases, intercom voices, children laughing, parents calling after them. I watched a young family by the check-in counter, the father juggling bags, the mother holding a baby against her chest, both smiling in that exhausted, beautiful way that parents do when they still believe the world is kind. The little girl tugged at her father's sleeve, pointing excitedly toward a plane outside. I couldn't look away. There was something so simple and whole about them. It made me think of my own family, how our love had always felt conditional, earned through achievement, obedience, or silence. I wondered what it would have been like to grow up in a family where love was just given, no performance required. I found my gate early and sat near the window, watching the runway glisten under the weak morning sun. I reached into my bag and pulled out my father's old notebook. It was small, worn, the leather edges soft from years of use. I'd carried it with me since his funeral, but rarely opened it. Inside were a few pages of sketches and notes, and small bits of advice he'd written in his neat handwriting. Between 2 pages, a folded piece of paper slipped loose, a note he'd given me when I left for college. I unfolded it carefully. The ink had faded a little, but the words were still clear. Be kind, but don't be small. I traced the letters with my thumb. I remembered the day he'd given it to me, how I'd laughed, thinking it was just one of his gentle fatherly sayings. But sitting here now, surrounded by people rushing toward destinations that mattered to them, I finally understood what he meant. I'd spent so much of my life being kind that I'd forgotten to take up space. I'd let kindness shrink into something timid, a way to keep the peace, even when it hurt. My father hadn't meant it that way. He'd meant for me to live large in spirit, to be gentle without disappearing. When they called my boarding group, I closed the notebook and slipped it back into my bag. As I walked down the jet bridge, I felt a flicker of something unfamiliar. Maybe courage, maybe the start of it. I took my seat by the window, buckled in, and let out a slow breath as the plane filled with strangers. The woman next to me was older, maybe in her late 60s. She smiled warmly as she settled in. "Heading home or heading away?" she asked. I thought about it. A little of both, I said. She nodded, understanding more than I expected. That's the best kind of trip. As the plane began to taxi, I looked out the window. The rain streaked across the glass, soft and silver. The engines roared to life, and for a moment, everything inside me went quiet. Then the plane lifted smoothly, powerfully, and the city fell away beneath the clouds. I felt the weight of Portland slipping off my shoulders, the years of careful restraint lifting with it. Once we were above the clouds, I pulled out my journal and opened to a blank page. The words came slowly at first, then steadier. I wrote, "I deserve a quiet kind of joy." I underlined it twice. Not the loud, celebrated kind of joy that came with approval or applause. Just the quiet kind, the kind that didn't ask for permission. The kind that existed simply because I did. The flight attendants came by with drinks, and I took coffee, smiling faintly, when the steam rose into the cool cabin air. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't thinking about what my mother would say, or whether Jason would notice my absence. I wasn't thinking about the empty seat at their wedding table or the gossip that might follow. I was thinking about the ocean I was about to see. About standing on warm sand with no one expecting anything from me. Hours passed in a blur of movies, half-slept dreams, and the hum of engines. Somewhere over the Pacific, I opened the window shade, and there it was, the ocean. Vast, endless blue, so deep it looked almost unreal. The sunlight hit it in scattered diamonds, and I felt something inside me loosen like a knot finally untied. For the first time in years, I wasn't defined by anyone's version of me. I was just me. The woman beside me glanced out the window too. Beautiful, isn't it? It is, I said. It feels like freedom. She smiled. That's how you know you're heading the right way. I turned back to the window, resting my forehead lightly against the glass. I imagined my father somewhere beyond those clouds smiling. He'd loved the ocean, its steadiness, its mystery. He used to say that the sea was the one place that didn't care who you were. It only reflected what you brought to it. Maybe that was what I was chasing, not escape, but reflection. As the flight attendants began collecting cups, I closed my eyes, feeling the rhythmic sway of the plane. The last thought that crossed my mind before drifting into sleep was how light my heart felt. Not fixed, not healed, but light. Somewhere between dreaming and waking, I felt my phone buzz inside my bag. I reached for it groggily, blinking against the dim cabin light. The screen glowed with a notification that made my stomach twist. Jason and Emma's wedding tomorrow. For a moment, I just stared at it, the word sharp against the dim cabin light. Tomorrow. Their big day. My brother's wedding. The one I wasn't invited to. I set the phone face down on the tray table and pressed my forehead to the cool airplane window. Outside, the ocean stretched below like an endless sheet of glass, catching the sunlight in flashes of silver. It looked peaceful, eternal nothing like the tangle inside me. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath, trying to leave everything that hurt me on the other side of those clouds. By the time the plane landed in Maui, the late afternoon sun was painting the sky in soft golds and pinks. The air hit me the moment I stepped outside, warm, fragrant, alive. It smelled like salt and hibiscus and something faintly sweet that I couldn't name. For the first time in months, I felt my shoulders begin to unclench. The taxi driver, a kind man with sun-creased skin, chatted as we drove along the coast. I watched the palm trees sway lazily, and the waves roll against the black rocks, rhythmic and steady, as if the ocean itself was breathing. When we pulled into the small villa I'd rented, I almost laughed. It was beautiful in a way that didn't try to impress: white walls, open shutters, a porch that faced the sea. The sound of waves was constant, but soft, like a lullaby for grown-ups who had forgotten how to rest. I carried my bags inside, opened the windows wide, and stood for a while, just letting the warm air wash over me. Later, after unpacking, I wandered down the narrow path that led to the beach. The sand was pale and smooth, cool beneath my feet. The sun was dipping toward the horizon, and a few locals were still out, children chasing each other near the water, a man tossing a frisbee to his dog. It felt so ordinary, and yet I couldn't remember the last time I'd been part of something so peaceful. That's when I saw her, an older woman, sitting on a weathered bench near the dunes, her silver-streaked hair tied back with a scarf. She was holding a mug in both hands, looking out at the sea, as if she were listening to it speak. When I passed, she smiled the kind of smile that feels like sunlight. "First time here?" she asked. I nodded. "Is it that obvious?" She laughed softly. "You're walking like someone who hasn't taken a deep breath in a while." I couldn't help but smile. "You're not wrong. Leilani," she said, offering her hand. "I live just up the road. My husband and I ran the old cafe here before he passed." "Brooke," I replied. "It's nice to meet you." We talked for a few minutes, nothing deep at first. She told me about the tides, how the beach looked different every season, how the sea could be gentle one day and fierce the next. There was something about her that made me want to keep listening. When she spoke, it was like the world slowed down to match her rhythm. Eventually, she said, "There's coffee at my place in the morning if you like. Best on the island." Normally, I would have politely declined, but something in her tone made me nod instead. "I'd like that," I said. That night, I fell asleep to the sound of the waves outside my window. It wasn't silence exactly, but it was the kind of quiet that healed instead of hurt. I dreamt of my father standing on a beach much like this one, smiling and saying something I couldn't quite hear. The next morning, the sun woke me before 6. I walked barefoot to Leilani's house, following the scent of coffee and something sweet baking. Her porch overlooked the sea, and she was already sitting there, 2 mugs steaming on the table. "Morning, traveller," she said with a smile. "You sleep well," I did, I said, taking a seat beside her. "Better than I have in years." She handed me a cup. That's what the ocean does. It pulls things out of you, sometimes gently, sometimes not. We sat quietly for a while, sipping coffee and watching the tide come in. The water glimmered under the early light, calm but alive. Leilani spoke first. "People come here thinking the island will fix them. But Hawaii doesn't heal what you refuse to face. It just gives you space to listen." Her words settled over me like mist. "Maybe that's what I need," I said. "Space to listen." She looked at me for a long moment. "You've been carrying something heavy." I nodded. "Family." "Ah," she said softly, as if that explained everything. "Family is the first tide we learn to swim against." I told her just a little the wedding, the distance, how my mother had always made me feel small. She didn't interrupt or try to fix anything. She just listened. When I finished, she said, "You can forgive someone without inviting them back into your heart. Forgiveness is for your peace, not theirs." I stared out at the horizon where the sky met the water in a perfect line. "I don't know if I can forgive her yet." "You don't have to," she said gently. "But don't let her steal the peace you came here to find." I thought about that as the wind lifted the edges of the napkin between us. For the first time, forgiveness didn't sound like surrender. It sounded like letting go of a weight that wasn't mine to carry. We finished our coffee in silence, the good kind that didn't need filling. When I walked back to my villa, I felt lighter. I showered, opened the windows wide, and began sketching in my notebook lines and curves inspired by the waves. For hours, I forgot the world beyond the shore. Then my phone buzzed on the nightstand. I almost ignored it, but habit made me check. It was a text from my mother. Just 4 words: "Enjoy your loneliness." The air seemed to change. The calm I'd built in the last 24 hours cracked the words, stinging more than I wanted to admit. I stared at the screen until the letters blurred, then turned the phone off and set it face down. That evening, I went back to the beach. Leilani was there again, walking slowly along the shoreline, her skirt brushing the waves. She looked up when she saw me. "Rough day?" she asked. "Old ghosts," I said quietly. She nodded as if she understood completely. We stood side by side, watching the waves crash and pull back again over and over. After a long silence, she spoke softly, her voice nearly lost to the wind. "Even paradise can't hide what we're running from." That night, her words followed me into my dreams. The ocean's rhythm became a heartbeat, steady and patient, as if waiting for something to surface. When I woke, the sky outside my window was still, streaked with the first soft light of morning. The air was cool, filled with the sound of the tide breathing against the sand. For a few moments, I just lay there watching the curtains stir in the breeze, letting the stillness fill me. It was the morning of my brother's wedding, June 14th, my father's birthday, and yet, for the first time in years, I felt no urge to check my phone, no need to know what they were doing without me. I slipped into my swimsuit and walked down the narrow path to the beach. The world was quiet except for the low hum of the ocean. The sand was cool beneath my feet, and when I stepped into the water, it embraced me with gentle resistance. I swam out just far enough that I could float the sky opening wide above me. The water was clear and calm, and for a moment I felt weightless, suspended between sea and sky as if the past couldn't reach me here. When I finally came back to shore, the sun was beginning to climb, turning the horizon gold. I wrapped myself in a towel and sat on the sand, breathing in the salt air. I thought about my father then, not the grief but the warmth of his voice, the quiet comfort of his presence. He would have hated how far we drifted as a family. He used to say that love was a daily choice, not a trophy you handed to the winner of your approval. I went back to the villa, showered and made coffee. When I opened my phone, the screen filled with notifications, social media updates, emails, random alerts. Against my better judgment, I opened Instagram. The first thing I saw was my mother's post, a photo of her Jason and Emma, all smiling beneath a canopy of white flowers. The caption read, "A perfect day for our perfect boy." Perfect, that word again. I stared at the photo. My mother's face was radiant, Emma's eyes glossy with excitement, Jason standing tall and proud, the golden sun in his shining hour. For a moment I felt the old ache creep in, the one that whispered, "You don't belong there." But then another thought followed, quiet and steady. Maybe I never did, and maybe that's okay. Still, the picture pulled me backward. I remembered the first time I met Emma Thanksgiving years ago before they were engaged. She'd arrived at my mother's house in a fitted red dress, every hair perfectly in place. Jason had introduced us, and she'd looked me up and down with that polished smile people use when they're sizing you up. "So you're the sister," she'd said, as if I were a rumour she'd heard once but hadn't believed. "Guilty," I joked, trying to keep it light. Later that evening after dinner, I'd been helping clear the table when I overheard her in the kitchen laughing with my mother. "She's nice," Emma had said, her voice syrupy, "but she's kind of quiet, isn't she?" My mother had chuckled. "Brooke's always been that way. Never one for the spotlight." Emma had lowered her voice, but not enough. "You mean she doesn't compete? That's rare these days." They'd both laughed softly. I remembered standing there with a plate in my hands, my face burning, telling myself it didn't matter. But it did, because in that moment I understood exactly where I stood in their world, someone to be admired politely, then dismissed. I closed the memory like a book I didn't want to reread. Years later, that same dynamic hadn't changed. I could see it in my mother's post, the way she leaned toward Emma, claiming her as the new extension of her pride. And me, I was the silence that didn't fit into their picture-perfect frame. I set the phone down and walked out to the porch. The sea shimmered in the late morning light, as though the world had decided to move on regardless of anyone's pain. I let it wash over me, that quiet indifference. Maybe that was what freedom really was, knowing that life didn't need your permission to keep being beautiful. After breakfast, I pulled my sketchbook from my bag. I hadn't planned to draw, but my hand moved on its own lines of waves, shifting horizons, the curve of the shoreline where land met sea. I thought about what Leilani had said the night before, about paradise not being a hiding place, but a mirror. I was beginning to see what she meant. Out here, there was nowhere for my pain to echo, but back at me. And somehow, that made it softer. By afternoon, the sun had turned fierce. I stretched out under the shade of the porch, the hum of cicadas filling the air. I must have dozed off because when I woke, the light had changed. I reached for my phone out of habit, meaning only to check the time. That's when I saw it, a notification from TikTok. At first I ignored it, but then another one came, and another. My heart began to beat faster. Curiosity or maybe dread made me open the app. The video at the top of my feed was tagged Walsh Wedding Disaster. I froze. The thumbnail showed a blurred image of white fabric and chaos people crowding around what looked like a reception hall. I stared at the caption again, making sure I wasn't seeing things. Walsh Wedding. My name wasn't there, but it might as well have been. I hesitated, thumb hovering over the screen. For a few seconds, all I could hear was the sound of the ocean outside, calm and steady, as if mocking the storm I suddenly felt building inside me. A small part of me told myself to look away, to put the phone down to keep my peace intact, to let whatever happened back there stay there. But another part, the one that had always been left out, always been silent, needed to know, needed to see. I took a deep breath, my fingers trembling slightly. Then I tapped the video. The sound hit me first, a distorted mix of shouting laughter and someone crying. The camera shook as if the person filming couldn't decide whether to keep going or run away. At first, it looked like any wedding, people in bright clothes, music blaring, flowers everywhere. Then, the chaos came into focus. Emma was in the centre of the frame, her white gown smeared with something dark wine maybe, and her mascara streaked down her cheeks. She was screaming at someone off camera, her voice breaking. The crowd was a mess of movement guests turning to one another in confusion, some holding up their phones, recording, whispering. The person filming tried to zoom in, and I heard Jason's voice, sharp, angry, almost panicked. "This is all her fault," he shouted. For a second, I didn't believe my own ears. Then the camera turned, catching him in full view. My brother, red-faced, his tie loosened, pointing towards someone out of frame. "Brooke!" he yelled. "It's Brooke's fault!" I froze. The name came through the speakers like a slap. My name. My mind couldn't process it. I wasn't there. I was half a world away. Yet there he was, in front of everyone, in front of the camera, saying my name like it was a curse. The crowd murmured. Someone said, "Who's?" "Brooke." Another voice, female, answered. His sister, the one who wasn't invited. Then laughter, cruel and knowing, rolled through the background. The video ended abruptly with Emma turning away, her veil ripping as she stormed off screen. I sat, completely still, the phone heavy in my hand. For a moment I told myself it had to be a mistake. Maybe someone else named Brooke. Maybe he'd meant something else. But my heart knew better. I replayed it once, twice, each time the same. Jason's voice, my name. My absence turned into an accusation. When I finally looked up from the screen, the light in the room had changed. The soft, golden glow of late afternoon had turned brittle sharp. I realised I was shaking. My throat felt dry. I set the phone down, but my fingers wouldn't unclench. The next notification came within seconds, a TikTok comment, then another, then dozens. I opened the app again, and there it was, my name trending. Videos multiplying, strangers dissecting every frame of the clip, debating who I was, what I'd done. Someone had dug up a photo from my Instagram, a picture of me at my studio smiling over a cup of coffee, and posted it with the caption, "This is the sister who ruined her brother's wedding." My heart sank. My picture, my face, now part of a story I didn't even live. Comments flooded in. "She looks jealous. Why wasn't she invited? Some people can't stand to see others happy." I scrolled until the words blurred, until they all blended into one cruel, humming noise. I put the phone face down on the table and stepped outside onto the porch, hoping the sound of the ocean would drown it all out. But even the sea couldn't quiet my thoughts. I could still hear my brother's voice. This is all her fault. The betrayal stung deeper than I expected, not just because of the accusation, but because it came so easily to him. Because he knew I wouldn't fight back. I had been his safe place once. When we were kids, he used to come to my room when our parents fought, whispering that he wished things were different. I'd comforted him, defended him, even covered for his mistakes. But now, in the moment his life cracked open, my name had been the first weapon he reached for. I sank onto the porch steps, my hands trembling. The ocean glittered under the setting sun, endless and indifferent. It felt wrong that the world could still be so beautiful when mine was unraveling again. Another buzz from my phone, then a second, then a third. Against my better judgment, I picked it up. More notifications articles now. Drama at the Walsh wedding, bride breaks down as groom blames sister. There was even a slowed-down clip of Emma crying overlaid with sad piano music, the kind of thing people shared for sympathy clicks. I felt sick, how quickly people devour pain that isn't theirs. I tried to turn the phone off, but more messages appeared this time, from numbers I recognised. Melissa, my friend from Portland. Brooke, what's going on, Claire? Your family's trending on TikTok. Are you okay? I didn't know what to say. How do you explain to someone that you're being blamed for something you didn't even witness? That your family's shame has somehow found a way to reach you even across an ocean? The sound of a knock startled me. It was Leilani holding a small plate of fruit. She took one look at me and frowned. You look like you've seen a ghost. I forced a weak smile. Something like that. She sat beside me, her movements slow and steady, the way people move when they're not in a rush to fix you. You don't have to tell me, she said, but I think you should breathe. I did. In out shallow at first, then deeper. The air smelled like salt and mango. For a moment, it almost helped. Then, my phone vibrated again, the screen lighting up with one word that turned my blood cold. Mum. For a second, I just stared at it, my thumb hovering. Part of me wanted to throw the phone into the waves to let it sink beneath the tide. But another part of me knew there was no escaping her. There never had been. The ringing stopped, then started again. I took a deep breath, bracing myself for the sound of her voice, for whatever storm was about to come through the line. And then I answered. Brooke. My mother's voice cut through the line before I could even say hello. It was sharp, high-pitched, the voice she used when she'd already chosen her villain. How could you? I stood frozen in the middle of the room, the ocean still murmuring outside the window, steady and uncaring. Mum, I said carefully, what are you talking about? Don't you dare play innocent with me, she hissed. Jason's wedding, his entire wedding was ruined because of you. I closed my eyes, trying to keep my voice even. I didn't ruin anything. I wasn't even there. Well, apparently your absence didn't stop you from meddling, she snapped. You invited his ex, Brooke. You sent her the address. She showed up drunk, screaming, and the entire thing was filmed. Everyone knows it was you, my stomach dropped. What? Don't lie to me, she said, her tone cold deliberate now. The text came from your number. Do you understand what you've done to your brother? To this family? I sank into the nearest chair, the room spinning slightly. That's impossible, I said quietly. I didn't send anything. I haven't spoken to anyone from that world in years. Then, how do you explain this? She demanded. I heard rustling on the other end, the sound of her fumbling with her phone. She showed everyone Brooke. The messages came from you, your name, your number, your words, telling her she deserved closure, that Jason still cared. Do you know how that made Emma feel? I wanted to laugh at the absurdity, but no sound came out. Mum, listen to me. I didn't send any messages. Someone must have... Enough, she barked, her voice trembling with anger. For once in your life, stop pretending to be the victim. You've embarrassed us beyond repair. Your brother is humiliated. Emma won't even speak to him. Her words landed like blows. You think I did this on purpose? You really believe I would sabotage Jason's wedding? There was a pause, one of those awful silences that say more than words ever could. Then she spoke again, softer but crueler. You've always been jealous of him, Brooke. It was only a matter of time before it showed. My throat tightened. Jealous, don't, she warned. Don't make this worse. Just stay quiet. Don't post anything. Don't respond to anyone. And for God's sake, don't try to defend yourself. You've done enough damage already. The call went dead before I could answer. I sat there for a long time, the phone still pressed to my ear, the sound of the waves suddenly distant and hollow. My hands were trembling. My mother's words clung to me like salt, bitter, stinging, impossible to wash away. Then the notification started again. My phone buzzed over and over, a relentless hum. I picked it up reluctantly and saw what I dreaded most, my name splashed across comment threads, hashtags, even short clips edited to paint me as the villain in some viral morality play. I scrolled through one post that showed screenshots of the so-called messages, words I had never written. The sender's name was mine, the number correct. The text read, "He still thinks about you. You should be there. He'll regret marrying her." My own face appeared beside it, taken from an old social media photo. The comments were merciless. Typical jealous sister move. Some people can't handle being left out. Imagine ruining your own brother's wedding because you weren't invited. I felt physically ill. I wanted to scream to tell them it wasn't me, that someone had faked it all, but I knew how it would look. The more I denied, the guiltier I'd seem. The internet didn't care about truth, it cared about stories. And I had become the perfect one. I threw my phone onto the couch and walked outside, needing air. The sea looked the same as it had that morning, calm, radiant, endless. But now it felt mocking, like peace I hadn't earned. I wrapped my arms around myself and tried to breathe. How did this happen? Who would do something like that? I thought back to Emma, her sharp smile, her tendency to compare, to compete. I remembered the Thanksgiving years ago, after she'd started dating Jason, when I'd walked into the kitchen to find her whispering to my mother again. "She still lives alone," Emma had said, her tone dripping with sympathy that wasn't real. "That's so sad. Jason said she's doing fine, but I just can't imagine being her age and still single." My mother had murmured something I couldn't hear, but I remembered Emma's laugh, low, satisfied. And then another memory followed, clearer now. A year later, I'd seen Emma's face tighten when Jason showed me a new promotion letter saying I'd designed the office space for his firm. She'd smiled too quickly. "Oh, that's nice, Brooke. How creative." Jealousy had always been there, simmering just under her polished surface. The thought twisted inside me, was this her revenge? But even that didn't make sense. Why would she destroy her own wedding? I went back inside, pacing. The sun was setting, painting the room in orange light. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from Melissa. "Brooke, I saw everything online. I know you didn't do it, but it looks bad. You need to figure out who's behind this." Her words broke something loose in me. I couldn't just sit here and let this consume me. Someone had planned this. Someone had wanted my name to burn. I picked up my father's old notebook from the table, clutching it like a talisman. His words came back to me, "Be kind, but don't be small." For years I'd taken that to mean forgive and endure, but maybe now it meant something else, stand tall, even when the world tries to make you smaller. I sat down, opened my laptop, and began searching through my accounts. My phone records, my recent texts, anything that could explain how those messages had come from my number. But everything looked clean. Too clean. Whoever did this knew what they were doing. Outside, the waves kept rolling their rhythm, steady, uncaring. I stared out at the horizon, feeling the sharp divide between the peace I'd come here to find and the chaos that had followed me anyway. It wasn't coincidence. It wasn't chance. I whispered the truth out loud just to hear it take shape. Someone wanted me to take this fall. The words hung in the air, fragile but certain. The villa was quiet except for the soft hiss of the tide outside, the sound that had once calmed me, now barely reaching through the noise inside my head. I sat at the small wooden table by the window, staring at my laptop screen, the blue light flickering against my hands. I'd been scrolling for hours, trapped in an endless loop of comments, reposts, and theories about a story that wasn't mine. Somewhere between the anger and the disbelief, I'd stopped crying. I'd just gone still. The video had gone viral. Millions of views. I watched it again, not because I wanted to, but because I needed to understand how a lie had turned into my reality. My name was everywhere, threaded through hashtags and captions pulled apart by strangers who spoke with certainty about a woman they'd never met. Brooke Walsh, the jealous sister. Brooke, who invited the ex to destroy her brother's wedding. It was madness, and yet the more people repeated it, the truer it began to sound to the world. I scrolled through the comments half numb until one caught my eye. It was small, buried beneath thousands of others written by someone named Tiffany R. The name tugged at my memory. I clicked the profile. There were wedding photos, Jason and Emma, smiling Tiffany beside them in a lavender dress. I remembered now, she'd been the maid of honor, Emma's best friend. Her comment was simple, but it froze me where I sat. It wasn't her. I stared at it for a long moment, unsure what to make of it. Then my phone buzzed. A new message on Instagram from a private account. You deserve to know what really happened. My pulse quickened. I hesitated, staring at the name. Tiffany R. I opened the message. The first thing I saw were screenshots. Text messages, my name at the top, my number. But as I read the words, something twisted in my gut. The phrasing was off. They sounded like me, but not me. Whoever had written them had studied my tone calm, polite, measured, but missed the warmth, the rhythm. You should come. Jason will want closure. You owe it to yourself. The words were too formal, too rehearsed. Someone had mimicked my voice and used it like a weapon. I wrote back, my fingers trembling. Tiffany, where did you get these? Her reply came quickly. I was there when Emma showed them to your brother. She was hysterical, said you'd been talking to Jason's ex for weeks. But I knew something was off. Emma never even had your number. She said your mum gave it to her. I felt my breath catch. My mum. Before I could type, another message appeared. I shouldn't be telling you this, but I think your mother wanted to test Emma. She told Jason she needed to see how Emma would handle pressure. I overheard part of it before the rehearsal dinner. I stared at the words until they blurred. My mother had always been a master manipulator, but even for her, this was beyond cruel. Test her. By what destroying her wedding? I typed slowly. Are you saying my mother set me up? Tiffany's typing bubble appeared, then vanished, then reappeared. Finally, the message came through. I think she used your number to send the messages. Someone in the family group chat mentioned that she'd borrowed your contact info a few weeks ago for Hugh's emergency records. I didn't think much of it then. I pushed the chair back, my body tense. The ocean outside shimmered in the moonlight, calm and unbothered. Inside, everything felt like it was burning. It made sense in a sick way how my number could have been cloned, how my tone could have been replicated. My mother had always known how to sound like me, how to twist my words into something convenient for her. She'd done it in conversations for years, rephrasing my thoughts to suit her narrative. Now, she'd just taken it one step further. The next message came longer this time. I didn't want to get involved, but when I saw what was happening online, I couldn't stay quiet. Jason's angry, but I think he's confused. Emma's been posting things too. She's feeding it. She wants you blamed. I scrolled further and saw a link. Another post from Emma's account showing screenshots of my texts with captions like, "Some people can't let go." The comments were vile. I shut the laptop, my hands shaking. Tiffany messaged again. I know you don't trust me, but I can prove what I'm saying. Your mum didn't expect the wedding to go viral. She just wanted to reveal the truth in private, but it spiraled. Jason's devastated. Everyone's pretending it's your fault because that's easier than admitting she caused it. My stomach turned. I thought of my mother's call, the venom in her voice, the way she'd demanded silence. It wasn't guilt, it was control. She needed me quiet so the lie could live unchallenged. Why would she do this? I typed. What would she get out of it? The reply came slower this time. I don't know. Maybe she wanted to prove Emma wasn't strong enough. Maybe she wanted to remind Jason that he still needs her. I just know she used your name to do it. I leaned back in the chair, staring at the shadows shifting on the ceiling. For years, I'd made excuses for my mother's cruelty, called it pride, worry tradition. But this wasn't worry. This was sabotage. And it had my name on it. Tiffany's next message came through before I could respond. "There's something else. You should hear this." A new notification appeared in audio file. "Play it when you're alone." I hesitated. The world outside my window was so still, the ocean humming like it was holding its breath. I put on my headphones and hit play. At first, all I heard was static, the background noise of a crowded room, clinking glasses, low voices. Then, Jason's voice cut through, unmistakable, weary but familiar. Mum told me Brooke would ruin it anyway, he said, his tone almost resigned. So maybe it's better this way. The recording ended. For a long moment I couldn't move. My heartbeat drowned out the sound of the waves. My brother. My own brother had said it accepted it as if it were already written somewhere that I was meant to ruin things, that I was destined to fail them. I took off the headphones, slowly staring out into the dark horizon. My reflection stared back at me in the window. Calm, composed, but something new in the eyes. A spark. They wanted me to take the fall, and they thought I would stay silent, as always. But not this time. After that thought, the silence in the villa felt heavier than before, thick with things unsaid. I sat by the open window, the sound of the waves faint and rhythmic, like the pulse of something ancient. The air was warm, but I felt cold. The audio file still echoed in my ears, Jason's voice repeating like a haunting refrain Mum told me Brooke would ruin it anyway. It wasn't just accusation, it was acceptance. He hadn't questioned it. He had believed her the way we all had. I opened my laptop again. My reflection hovered faintly on the dark screen before the light of it came alive. The screenshots Tiffany had sent were still open, the fake messages written in my voice. I studied them not for the lies, but for the details. The rhythm of the sentences, the choice of words, the subtle turns of phrase that felt familiar in a way that made my stomach turn. Then slowly a memory began to form. Years ago, my mother had sent me an email after an argument. Something about Jason's college tuition, how I'd misunderstood her intentions. The tone had been cold, but carefully composed, layered with false affection and control. I searched my inbox, now scrolling until I found it. "You have such a generous heart, Brooke, but sometimes you act without considering what's best for the family." The phrasing hit me like a strike of lightning. What's best for the family? The exact same words that Tiffany said my mother had used to justify her scheme. And when I looked again at the fake messages, one line stood out. "You should do what's best for the family, even if others don't understand." My breath caught. She had used her own words, her own pattern to forge mine. She hadn't just stolen my number, she'd stolen my voice. I went further back, combing through years of emails, texts, holiday messages. The more I read, the clearer it became. My mother had always spoken in gentle ultimatums. Do this for your brother. Don't embarrass us. Be understanding. Be good. And every time I'd given in, she'd rewarded me with silence, no thanks, no recognition, just the absence of disapproval. That had been my prize. The truth unfolded in layers. This wasn't the first time she had used me as her instrument. This was just the first time I had proof. My phone buzzed again. Tiffany. I hesitated before answering. Her voice was small, hesitant. "Brooke, I wasn't sure you'd pick up." "I wasn't sure either," I said quietly. "I need to tell you something," she said, and her voice trembled. "Your mum, she made me help her. I didn't speak. She said it was for the family, that Emma had been questioning things. She wanted to see how far Emma's loyalty went. I didn't know she'd take it this far, I swear. She just told me to reach out to Jason's ex to test the boundaries. She said it would be a small thing, harmless. But then she used your number, Brooke. I didn't understand what she was planning until the wedding. My throat felt dry. Why didn't you stop it? I was scared," Tiffany admitted. "Your mum, She's not someone you say no to. She said she was protecting Jason. She said Emma wasn't strong enough to be part of your family. Protecting Jason. I almost laughed at the word. My mother's version of protection had always been about control, containing, shaping, silencing. Tiffany, I said softly, why are you telling me this now? She was quiet for a moment. Because I saw your face on the internet today, and I knew what she'd done. I can't undo it, but I can't keep it secret either. You deserve to know. I didn't thank her. I didn't have it in me. We spoke for another minute, her voice breaking, asking if I was okay. I told her I didn't know yet, and when the call ended, the villa felt impossibly still again. I turned off my phone and stared at the horizon. The sun was dipping lower, staining the sea with streaks of orange and gold. Somewhere out there, my family was probably in damage control mode. My mother spinning new stories, Jason sulking, Emma posting cryptic apologies online. And me, I was supposed to fade away, just another casualty in their performance. But something inside me had shifted. The grief had burned away, leaving something clearer, sharper. Anger, yes, but not the wild kind. This was the kind of anger that sees everything in perfect focus. I thought back over the years how my mother had managed us like pieces on a chessboard. Jason, the favoured son, protected to the point of weakness. Me, the scapegoat, groomed to absorb the fallout of every bad decision. Every misunderstanding, every family matter had been orchestrated. Even when my father was alive, she had found ways to twist the truth. She'd once convinced him that I had dropped out of an internship I'd actually completed just to make me seem unreliable. He'd apologised to me later after finding the truth, but by then she'd already achieved what she wanted to keep me small. Now I understood the pattern. She needed control like oxygen, and the easiest way to maintain it was through guilt and silence. She'd taught me both. I stood and walked out onto the porch. The wind carried the smell of salt and frangipani, and the sky was wide and merciful. I thought about how much of my life had been spent trying to earn her kindness, mistaking manipulation for love. Even now, part of me wanted to call her to demand an explanation to make her see me. But I knew how that conversation would go. She'd twist my words until I sounded unreasonable. And maybe that was her real talent, not just in making people obey, but in making them doubt their own reality. Not anymore. I went back inside, opened my notebook, and began to write. Not sketches, but thoughts. What Tiffany had said, what I'd found, what I remembered, every detail, every phrase, every proof of how she'd turned my life into a quiet script she directed. As I wrote, the words stopped shaking. They came cleaner, steadier. For years, I'd thought silence was strength. That holding my tongue made me the bigger person. But now I saw it for what it was, a lesson she'd drilled into me to keep me compliant. She'd mistaken my restraint for weakness. I looked out at the ocean again, the water shifting under the first traces of twilight. My reflection shimmered faintly in the glass. Someone I almost didn't recognise, someone standing taller. She taught me silence. I whispered the word soft, but certain. Now I'll teach her truth. That sentence lingered in the air long after I spoke it. It didn't sound like anger anymore. It sounded like promise. The night outside the villa was still the ocean, a slow heartbeat in the dark. I sat at the small table with my father's old notebook open beside my laptop. His neat handwriting filled half the pages. Reminders, sketches, lists of things to fix around the house. I ran my finger over the ink and thought about all the things he'd left behind, and all the things I'd never really understood until now. The next morning I woke early, the light pouring in through the shutters. My mind felt sharp, clear. I made coffee and opened my computer again, but this time I didn't search for my mother or Jason or the wedding. I searched for Harrison Lowell Attorneys at Law, my father's old firm. I remembered going there with him once when I was a child, sitting in the waiting room colouring while he discussed something important with his lawyer. After he died, my mother handled everything: the funeral, the estate, the sale of his office furniture. I'd been too deep in grief to question any of it. But now, I wondered, The firm's name popped up instantly, along with a number. I stared at it for a long time before dialing. When a calm male voice answered, I said, "My name is Brooke Walsh. I think my father Thomas Walsh was a client of yours." There was a pause. "Yes," the man said. "I'm Robert Harris. I handled his estate. I'm sorry, did you say Brooke?" "Yes." His tone changed immediately. "We've been trying to reach you for years." The word startled me. "To reach me, why Miss Walsh?" he said carefully. "I think there's been a misunderstanding. You were one of the beneficiaries of your father's will. Are you saying you were never contacted?" I felt a chill run through me. "No. My mother took care of everything after he passed. She told me there wasn't much left, that most of his assets went to cover medical bills and the mortgage." Another pause, longer this time. When he spoke again, his voice was different, measured, cautious. "That's not correct. According to the will, the house was paid off years before he passed. You and your brother were each entitled to half ownership of the family home, as well as smaller personal accounts. Your mother was named executor, but she wasn't listed as a beneficiary." I gripped the edge of the table. "That can't be right. I can send you the documents," he said gently. "We have the signed will notarized along with copies of the transfer deeds. But if what you're saying is true, that you never received your share, then something may have happened after probate." The conversation blurred after that. He asked for my email, promised to send digital copies immediately. I thanked him mechanically and ended the call. My hands were shaking as I stared at the laptop, waiting for the documents to arrive. When they did, I opened them one by one. The will was exactly as he'd described my father's handwriting, his signature, my name listed alongside Jason's. But when I scrolled to the transfer deed, my breath caught. There, it was my name written in my mother's tight, perfect script. But the signature at the bottom wasn't mine. It was close, painfully close, my name spelled out in the same looping letters I'd used since college, but the angle was wrong. The B slanted backward. The W was sharper, heavier. It wasn't mine. I stared at it until the lines blurred, until the truth became impossible to deny. She hadn't just forged my voice or my name in messages. She'd forged my identity. For a long time, I couldn't move. I could still remember that day after the funeral, her sitting at the kitchen table with stacks of papers, a glass of wine beside her. I'd been too numb to ask questions. She'd said, "You don't need to worry about any of this, Brooke. It's just legal stuff." I had nodded and gone upstairs, closing myself into my old room, never imagining that legal stuff meant erasing me from my father's will. I called Robert Harris back, my voice unsteady but controlled. "Mr. Harris, I think my mother forged my signature. Can I send you the file?" "Yes," he said immediately. "Please forward it. If that's true, it's a serious matter." I sent the documents and waited, pacing the room. When the phone finally rang again, his tone was grave. "Miss Walsh, I've compared the signatures with the ones we have on file from your father's will signing. The difference is clear. Whoever signed the transfer document wasn't you." My heart pounded. "Can this be proven?" "Yes," he said. "And it's not just about the signature. The timing is suspicious. The property transfer was filed 3 months after your father's death, almost exactly when we stopped hearing back from your contact address. The correspondence was suddenly redirected to a new email account under your name, but the messages were clearly written by someone else. We assumed you had authorized it." A slow, sick realization settled over me. She intercepted everything. "I'm afraid that's likely," he said. "She would have needed access to your personal information to do that. She had everything, my social security number, my birth certificate, my father's old files. I'd given her access willingly, trusting her to handle things I couldn't face. She turned that trust into an opportunity." "I can't believe this," I whispered. "She stole from her own daughter." He hesitated before answering. "Miss Walsh, I've worked in estate law for 30 years. I've seen families torn apart over far less. But this looks deliberate. His voice softened then. Your father left a letter with his will. He wanted it delivered to both of you, but it was never acknowledged. I'm sending it to you now. My inbox pinged a minute later. I opened the scanned letter, my father's handwriting instantly recognizable. My dearest Brooke and Jason, it began. If you're reading this, I'm gone. Please remember that love isn't measured in who gets what it's measured in, how you take care of each other when I no longer can. I swallowed hard, blinking back tears as I read on. Brooke, you have your mother's strength and my patience. Jason, you have your mother's drive and Brooke's heart. Don't let those pieces tear you apart. The house is meant to keep you together, not divide you. Share it. Protect each other. The words blurred as I reached the end. The irony was unbearable. My father's final wish had been turned into a weapon. The house meant to unite us had been stolen to strengthen the very divide he'd feared. Robert Harris's voice broke through my thoughts. Miss Walsh, I'll be honest with you. Legally, you have a strong case if you choose to pursue this. The statute of limitations hasn't expired. But this won't be easy. You'll be challenging your mother in court. It will go public. I looked out at the horizon. The water shimmered in the afternoon sun, endless and calm, as if daring me to disturb it. I'm not afraid of the truth anymore, I said quietly. He was silent for a moment. Then he said something that made my breath catch. Brooke, before we go further, I need you to know one last thing. When your mother cut off communication, we didn't stop trying. We sent letters, emails, even certified mail to your old address. He paused, his voice careful. We've been trying to reach you for years. The words lingered long after the call ended, echoing like a bell struck deep inside me. Years. All that time, I thought the silence after my father's death was simply grief, our family's unspoken way of coping. But it wasn't silence at all. It was suppression. My mother hadn't just stolen from me. She had rewritten the story of our lives and buried the evidence. The light outside had softened by the time I set my phone down. I sat there staring at the horizon, the waves moving with a calmness that mocked the storm inside me. I wanted to cry, but the tears wouldn't come. I felt emptied, stripped of outrage, left only with a dull, heavy ache. That was when my phone rang again. The name flashing on the screen made my breath catch. Jason. For a moment, I couldn't move. I hadn't heard his voice since before the wedding. The thought of speaking to him now filled me with both dread and something else I couldn't name, maybe the faint, foolish hope that he might finally see the truth. I pressed accept. Brooke, he said, his voice raw, shaky. Not the confident tone he'd always used when talking to me, but smaller, uncertain. Jason, I said quietly. He exhaled, the sound brittle. I didn't think you'd answer. I almost didn't. There was a pause, the kind that stretches like a crack between people who used to know each other. I heard about the will, he said finally. Mom told me you were making up stories again. But then I saw the documents online. I saw the lawyer's name. She told you I was lying, I asked, though I already knew the answer. She said you were confused, he said, and there was shame in his voice. Said you didn't understand what she'd done, that she was just protecting the family I finished for him. He went quiet. When he spoke again, his voice broke. Brooke, I need to tell you something. Something I should have told you years ago. I felt my chest tighten. Go on. You remember after Dad died, he said. How Mum said there were bills left, unpaid debts from the business. Yes, I said slowly. She told me she sold his office to cover them. There were no debts, he said. She told me the same story, but she said the house was in jeopardy, that we could lose it unless one of us signed over our share to her. I was 21, scared, and I didn't want to lose what Dad built. So I signed. She said it was temporary, that once things were settled, she'd put it back in our names. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. And you believed her? He hesitated. Yes. I thought I was helping. I didn't know she forged your signature until later, and by then it was done. She said you didn't want your share anyway, that you'd agreed to let me have it. I let out a quiet breath, steady but cold. And you didn't think to ask me, he swallowed hard. I did once. But she said you were too upset that you didn't want to talk about it. Then when you stopped coming around, I figured maybe she was right. My voice was calm, almost detached. You figured wrong. I know, he whispered. I found out the truth a year later. She told me not to say anything, that bringing it up would only reopen wounds. She said I owed it to her for everything she'd done for us. I closed my eyes, letting his words sink in. The pieces fit too easily, each one another thread in the web she'd woven around us. Jason hadn't just been complicit, he'd been caught too. Not innocent, but not fully free either. Jason, I said softly, you signed my inheritance away. I know, he said, his voice breaking. And I'm sorry. I thought she was doing what was right. She said she needed control to manage things properly, that Dad's accounts were a mess. I didn't realize what she was doing until she started moving money. Not just from the estate, from my business too. I frowned. Your business? He laughed. Weakly, the sound bitter. She said she was investing in renovations for the house, said it would benefit us both. I wired her $70,000 over 2 years. Then, when I asked for receipts, she told me to stop questioning her. So, she took from both of us, I said quietly. Yes. The word hung between us. For the first time, I heard something like regret in his silence. Maybe it wasn't enough, but it was something. She told me to blame you, he said, after a moment, his voice cracking. At the wedding, when everything went wrong, when Emma started crying, when people started leaving, Mum told me it was your fault. She said you'd sent the ex that you wanted to ruin me. I didn't believe it at first, but she looked so sure. She said, you know your sister, she's always been jealous. And in that moment, I was angry enough to believe her. I let the words settle. You shouted my name, I said quietly, in front of everyone. He didn't deny it. I know, he said, and I can't take that back. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. I thought about the boy. He used to be the one who hid under my blanket during thunderstorms, whispering that he wished Mum wouldn't yell so much. The boy who'd once sworn he'd protect me when we grew up. That boy was gone, replaced by a man who had learned to survive the only way she taught him, by obeying. You both stole what wasn't yours, I said finally, my voice low but steady. He let out a shaky breath. I know. There was no anger left in me. Only the deep, quiet sadness of understanding how far we had both fallen under her shadow, how deeply her lessons had taken root. She had raised us to confuse loyalty with submission, to mistake silence for love. Brooke, he said softly, what are you going to do? I looked out the window at the horizon, where the last trace of sunlight bled into the sea. I don't know yet, but I can't let her rewrite the truth anymore. He hesitated. She'll fight you. You know she will. I'm counting on it. He gave a small broken laugh. You sound like Dad. Maybe that's not such a bad thing. We sat in silence for a moment longer, the sound of the ocean faint between us. I could almost imagine we were kids again, whispering in the dark, plotting how to stand up to her after another one of her tirades. But this time, the stakes were real. Jason, I said quietly, you've carried her lies long enough. You want to make this right? He didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was small, almost afraid. Yes, I do. Then help me, I said. He drew in a long breath. How I looked down at my father's notebook at the name Thomas Walsh written across the first page. My hands were steady now. You signed the paper that took what was mine, I said softly. Now, sign the one that gives it back. There was silence on the other end, long and heavy. Then I heard him whisper, okay. A faint smile touched my lips, one that didn't quite reach my eyes. Then help me put it right. After I ended the call with Jason, I sat still for a long time, staring at the dark ocean outside my villa. The waves were invisible, but I could hear them, constant and sure, rolling in and pulling back. Each one sounded like a breath the earth had been holding for too long. I thought about how many years I'd spent doing the same, holding my breath through my family storms, waiting for peace that never came. But something had changed. I wasn't waiting anymore. I opened my laptop and began to work. For hours, I dug through old files and messages tracing the digital fingerprints of everything my mother had done. I pulled copies of the forged deed screenshots, of the fake messages, the audio of Jason's confession, and the email from Robert Harris confirming the fraud. Each piece of evidence was like a wave gathering momentum, small at first, then growing until I could almost feel its pull. I wasn't building a case for revenge. I was building one for truth. When I finished, the folder on my desktop was named The Tide. I stared at the word for a moment, thinking about what it meant, something that couldn't be stopped once it began. The next morning, I walked down to the shoreline just as the sun rose, turning the sky into a slow bloom of colour. Leilani was there as if she had known I'd come. She stood barefoot in the surf, her grey hair loose around her shoulders, her long skirt brushing the water. "You're up early," she said, smiling softly. "I couldn't sleep," I admitted. She nodded, looking out at the horizon. "The sea doesn't sleep either. It remembers." I followed her gaze, the waves sliding toward us, whispering secrets to the sand. "I used to think silence was the only way to survive my family," I said quietly. "But now, I think it just gave them more room to lie." Leilani bent to pick up a smooth stone, turning it in her hand. "The tide always brings back what was buried," she said. "Even the things we think are gone for good. Truth is like that. It has a way of returning no matter how deep someone tries to hide it." I looked at her, wondering how she always seemed to know what to say. Maybe that was the wisdom of age, or maybe she simply recognised the kind of pain that stays beneath the surface too long. She pressed the stone into my palm. "When it comes back," she said, "don't be afraid to let it wash over you." I carried her words with me as I walked back to the villa. The decision had already been made. I wasn't going to my family. I wasn't calling my mother or sending more emails to lawyers. I was going to the one place she couldn't control the truth, out in the open. I searched online for journalists known for integrity, not scandal. It took time, but eventually I found her Nora Bennett, an investigative reporter who'd written about corruption in local charities and family trusts. Her articles weren't flashy. They were clean, factual, relentless. She didn't chase gossip, she chased accountability. I sent her an email with a brief message. "I have verifiable evidence of legal and financial fraud involving the Walsh family estate. I'm not selling a story. I'm offering the truth. Please contact me if you're willing to publish it without embellishment." I attached one document, just one, to show I wasn't bluffing the forged property transfer with my falsified signature. Then I closed the laptop and waited. It took less than an hour for her to reply. Her message was short. "I'm listening. Let's talk." We spoke later that afternoon over a secure video call. She was direct, professional, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. I told her everything from the wedding scandal to the forged texts, the inheritance theft, the years of manipulation. She didn't interrupt, only took notes, and occasionally asked for confirmation on dates and names. When I finished, she exhaled slowly. "This isn't just a family matter, Brooke," she said. "It's fraud, identity theft, and potentially tax evasion. Your mother's actions have legal consequences." "Are you prepared for that?" I nodded. "I am. I'm not looking for money or revenge. I just want the truth out there." She leaned forward slightly. "No payment, no conditions. Just print the truth," I said. There was a quiet respect in her eyes, then something rare. "All right," she said. "Send me everything you have." I did. Every file, every recording, every piece of proof. When I pressed send, my hands didn't shake this time. I felt a calm settle over me, the kind that comes when you finally stop running. That night, I walked along the beach until the sky turned black. The waves glowed faintly under the moonlight silver, and soft, folding and unfolding like breath. Somewhere behind me, my phone buzzed with a new message from Nora Publishing in the morning. "Brace yourself," I smiled faintly. "I already have," I murmured. For years, my mother had ruled through fear. Fear of humiliation, fear of rejection, fear of losing her approval. But fear only works when it stays hidden in the dark. Once you name it, once you drag it into the light, it loses its power. And the truth I'd unleashed tonight was brighter than anything she'd ever buried. I returned to the villa and stood by the window watching the tide roll in. The folder named The Tide still sat open on my computer, each document, a fragment of my life that had been stolen and reshaped. But now it was mine again, my story, my voice. I thought of Jason, of his broken apology, of the guilt in his voice. I didn't know what he would do when the truth came out. I didn't even know if he'd forgive me for exposing it. But forgiveness wasn't my goal. Freedom was. Leilani's stone sat on the table beside me, smooth and grey in the dim light. I picked it up and held it tightly. Outside, the wind picked up, and the palm trees swayed, whispering against the dark sky. The air felt different now, charged, expectant. When I finally went to bed, the ocean's rhythm lulled me to sleep. I dreamed of my father's voice, calm and steady. Be kind, but don't be small. At dawn, a sharp knock on the door woke me. It was Leilani, holding a folded newspaper, her expression unreadable. "You might want to see this," she said. I took it from her, the ink still smelling fresh. Across the front page, bold letters stretched from edge to edge, Walsh family's perfect image built on lies. My heart raced, but my hands were steady as the tide outside roared in approval. By noon, the world had already begun to move. The article spread faster than I could follow, shared, reposted, debated. It was everywhere. The words Walsh family sat bold and unflinching across headlines, followed by phrases that used to belong only to my mother's world-prestigious, admired pillar of the community. Now they were followed by others' fraud, forgery lies. I didn't feel triumphant, just still, like the air right after a storm passes, when everything smells of salt and change. I made tea, opened my laptop, and watched the inevitable unfold. Within hours, the networks picked it up. Reporters stood outside the white-columned Walsh house, the one my father built and my mother claimed. I watched it live on the TV in my villa's lounge, the bright Hawaiian sunlight pouring in around me, as if the two worlds, the chaos and the calm, didn't know each other existed. Then she appeared. My mother. She stood behind the podium in her rose-coloured blazer, hair perfectly set, makeup immaculate, her pearls gleaming like armour. The camera loved her, as it always had. She spoke with that careful, cultivated tone, measured, sympathetic, so practiced, that for a moment even I felt its pull. "These allegations are deeply hurtful," she said, her hand pressed to her chest. "Our family is going through a difficult time, and unfortunately, some private matters have been distorted by the press. My daughter has been unwell. I ask the public for compassion while we handle this as a family." I almost laughed. Unwell. It was her favourite word for anything she couldn't control. The journalists pressed her. "Did you forge your daughter's signature, Mrs. Walsh?" Her expression tightened by a hair's width. "Absolutely not. My late husband's estate was handled lawfully. I have nothing to hide." A second reporter called out, "What about the recordings and emails published this morning? Your daughter's lawyer confirmed they were authenticated." My mother smiled, a cold, perfect smile that belonged on the cover of one of her charity galas. "I can't comment on unverified gossip. I will say this: families are complicated. Brooke has always been sensitive. She misunderstands things. She always has." That sentence, the last one, hit harder than any accusation. The gentle dismissal, the casual rewrite of who I was. She hadn't changed a single note of her performance. She was doing it again, even now, with the world watching. But this time, the world was watching back. I turned off the TV. The silence that followed wasn't heavy, it was sharp, expectant. My phone buzzed once, twice, then kept vibrating. Notifications, messages, links. At first, I ignored them. Then, one caught my eye. Tiffany R. posted a video. I opened it. The screen showed a dimly lit room. The audio a little muffled, but the voices were clear. My mother's voice. The tone was the one she reserved for private moments, the one that dripped with disdain. "She's never been enough," she said, and I could hear the sneer, even without seeing her face. Brooke's quiet, timid, ordinary. She thinks being kind makes her special. It just makes her weak. I gave her everything and she still resents me. There was a pause. Then laughter hers. If she wants to play victim, let her. The world loves a sad story. The video cut off there. For a moment, I just sat there. My breath caught between disbelief and recognition. It wasn't the words themselves, they were only the latest in a long history of cruelty. It was hearing them out loud, hearing them stripped of context, of charm, of all the ways she had once managed to make her cruelty sound like care. The internet erupted. Within minutes, comments flooded in under the video. How could a mother talk like that? She's the weak one. Poor Brooke. Now we know who the real villain is. By the hour, sympathy shifted. Strangers who'd once doubted me now wrote paragraphs defending me. Old photos resurfaced me and my father at his office, him holding my shoulder proudly. Someone compared my mother's press statement with her leaked recording side by side. Public saint, private serpent, one caption read. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just exhaled. Because this wasn't revenge. This was truth returning just as Leilani had said it would, like the tide bringing back what was buried. I stepped outside onto the porch. The sun was setting, painting the sea in gold and violets. The air was warm and smelled faintly of jasmine. I could hear the ocean rolling in, steady and endless, like something ancient had finally found its rhythm again. I thought about my mother, not the woman in the blazer on television, but the one behind closed doors. The one who had once stood at my bedroom door when I was 15, telling me to keep my voice down, that good daughters don't talk back. The one who'd taken my father's last words and twisted them into rules I was never allowed to question. And now, for the first time, the world saw her too. The TV inside played faintly through the open door, the anchor's voice smooth and certain. The Walsh family has not responded to further requests for comment, though sources close to the family confirm that tensions are high. Many are calling for an official investigation. My phone buzzed again, a steady pulse against the wooden table beside me. I didn't reach for it at first. I just stood there watching the horizon fade. Then I saw the screen light up. Mum. For a long moment, I couldn't bring myself to open it. My thumb hovered my heartbeat, calm but heavy. Finally, I tapped the message. Please come home. Let's fix this. I read it once, then again. The words looked like a plea, but I knew better. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of what she'd done, just the same old command, hidden in softer tones. Come home. Back to her world, back under her control. I looked out at the sea again, the sound of the waves steady against the shore. Somewhere inside, I felt something loosen, the last thread of obligation, the last piece of the daughter she'd built in her image. The phone buzzed once more in my hand, the message still glowing on the screen. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel the need to answer. The silence that followed was pure, almost cleansing. I set the phone down on the porch table and stared at it, its black screen reflecting my face, the faint shimmer of the sea behind me. It was strange how quiet power could feel. Not loud, not vengeful, just clear. The kind of calm that comes when something long and ugly finally breaks apart. I thought of my mother's voice on television, so poised and certain, and then the sound of her laughter in Tiffany's recording, cold, careless, confident. That voice had built an entire world one, where love meant control and truth was whatever she decided it should be. But now, that world was cracking piece by piece. By the next morning, the headlines had changed again. Charity board suspends Mrs. Walsh amid fraud allegations. Walsh family's public image under investigation. Even the local TV anchors who used to call her the beloved matriarch now used words like embattled and disgraced. I didn't need to look for the updates. They found me. My inbox was full of messages from people I hadn't heard from in years, former friends of my mother, clients from my design work, even old teachers. Some offered sympathy, others just wanted the story confirmed. I answered none of them. Then, one afternoon, Jason called. The sound of his voice was different, strained hollow. "Brooke," he said quietly, "she's losing it." I stayed silent. He went on, words spilling fast like he needed to say them, before courage left him. "I went to see her. She's a mess. Reporters are camped outside the house. She keeps saying it's all a misunderstanding, that she can fix it. She tried to tell me to stand with her at a press conference. I told her no." That last word caught my attention. "You told her no," he exhaled shakily. "Yeah." And she didn't take it well. She started crying, like really crying. Said I'd abandoned her, said you've turned me against her. I told her this isn't about sides. It's about what she did. She screamed that she did it for us. For herself, I said softly. He hesitated. I think she doesn't even know the difference anymore. There was a pause. I could hear the weight in his silence, the kind that comes when you finally realize the person you trusted most is the one who built your cage. "She asked me to convince you to come home," he said finally. "Said maybe if you helped, we could rebuild what we lost." I almost laughed, but it wasn't funny. "What we lost," I repeated. "We didn't lose it, Jason. She took it." He didn't argue. "I know. His voice cracked slightly. "I didn't think it would all come apart like this. The house, her reputation, the business accounts, everything's frozen. She's panicking. I tried to calm her down, but she looks at me like I'm another enemy now." "That's what happens when control is all someone ever learns to love," I said. There was another long silence, filled only by the sound of waves outside my window. Finally he said, "Emma left." I blinked. "What? She packed up yesterday. Said she was going to stay with her cousin for a while out of town. Didn't say where exactly. Just left. I think she's pregnant." His words hit with quiet force. "You think?" She didn't say it outright, but she hasn't been drinking and she's been different lately. Distant. Tired. I saw her packing baby books into a box." He sighed. "I don't even know if she's coming back." For a moment, I didn't know what to say. Part of me felt pity for him, part of me didn't. His world too was collapsing. And yet, I couldn't help but wonder if this was how healing began, not clean or easy, but through everything that broke along the way. "I'm sorry," I said quietly, and I meant it not for what had happened, but for how it had to happen. "Me too," he said. I wanted you to know I'm not hiding from this. I'm talking to the lawyer tomorrow. I'll sign whatever you need." It was the first time he'd spoken without his mother's shadow in his voice. For that alone, I felt something like peace. "Thank you, Jason," I said. He hesitated, then whispered, "She's calling you, isn't she?" I looked at my phone on the table beside me, its screen lighting up again with the same name that had haunted me my entire life. "She's been calling all day. She's desperate," he said softly, "but she's still trying to control the story." "Be careful." I smiled faintly, though he couldn't see it. "Don't worry, I learned from the best." After we hung up, I stared at the phone as it buzzed again. Then again, I let it ring until it stopped. Finally, curiosity, or maybe old habit, got the better of me, and I played one of the voicemails. "Brooke," my mother's voice said, shaky, but still threaded with that old authority, "you're making a mistake. We can still fix this. I know you think you're doing the right thing, but you're not seeing the full picture. The media will move on, but family is forever. Come home, please, let's talk." The next message came only an hour later. Her tone had changed, softer breaking at the edges. "Brooke, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said those things about you. I was angry. I was scared. You know I love you. Please don't leave me like this. Everyone's turned against me. You're all I have left." And then another, just minutes after that, colder, sharper. "You think they care about you? The press, they'll forget you the second someone else falls apart. I'm still your mother. You'll regret humiliating me like this." The messages blurred together a cycle I knew too well. Pleading guilt, anger, silence. She had always known how to use her voice like a weapon, And even now, with her empire collapsing around her, she was trying to rebuild it on the one person she'd trained to listen. But this time, I didn't. I turned the phone off and walked outside. The sky was turning gold, the sun dipping low over the horizon. The water stretched wide and bright before me. I stood at the edge of the surf, feeling the pull of the tide around my ankles, steady and sure. This was what freedom sounded like, not applause, not forgiveness, but the absence of her voice in my head. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel guilty for her pain. I didn't mistake her regret for love. I let the waves take the sound of her calls away, and I let them stay gone. As I turned back toward the villa, the light had softened into evening. I picked up my phone again, not to turn it on, but to check for messages one last time before I shut it off for good. There was one new notification waiting, just one. It wasn't from my mother. It was from Emma. For a long moment, I just stared at the screen, her name glowing faintly in the soft evening light. I hadn't seen it since the wedding invitations went out, since the day she became part of the world that shut me out. My first instinct was hesitation. What could she possibly want now after everything that had happened? But something, curiosity, maybe mercy, made me open the message. I need to talk. Please. 2 words that sounded more like a cry than a request. I hesitated only a moment longer before typing back. All right, her reply came quickly. Can I call you? When the phone rang, I almost didn't recognize her voice. It was softer, unsteady, stripped of the brightness she used to wear like a crown. Brooke. Yes, thank you for answering, she said. Her voice wavered on the edge of tears. I wasn't sure you would. I sat down at the small table near the open window, the sound of waves steady in the distance. Why are you calling me Emma? I didn't know who else to call, she said. Jason's not answering, and your mother... She stopped, her breath catching. I can't go back there. I closed my eyes for a moment, remembering Jason's voice the day before. She's gone. I think she's pregnant. Where are you? I asked quietly. In a motel a few towns away, she said. I packed what I could. I didn't know where else to go. There was a long pause before she added, almost whispering, I'm pregnant. The words hung between us like a fragile truth, tender and raw. I didn't speak. I just listened to her breathing fast, uneven, frightened. I found out a week before the wedding, she said finally. I wanted to tell Jason, but your mother told me not to. She said he was under too much pressure already. She told me she'd handle it. Her voice cracked on the last words. I believed her. I could picture it so easily. My mother's gentle smile, her hand on Emma's shoulder, her tone calm and confident as she turned someone else's fear into power. She told me you'd ruin everything, Emma continued. She said you envied me, that you wanted to destroy the family because you weren't part of it anymore. I thought she was just trying to protect us. I looked out the window, watching the horizon darken. And you believed her. I did, she said. The confession came out like a sob. I thought you hated me. You were always so quiet, and your mother, she made it sound like you were dangerous. That you'd been unstable since your father died. I told myself I was just keeping the peace. Her voice broke completely then. I'm sorry, Brooke. I'm so sorry. For a long time, I didn't say anything. Not because I was angry, though, once I would have been, but because I was realizing something deeper. Every word Emma said sounded like an echo of my own life, just rearranged. The same manipulation, the same lies, the same soft voice, convincing her that obedience was love. You don't have to apologize to me, I said finally. You were caught in the same web I was. But I helped her, Emma whispered. She made me part of it. The fake messages, the stories about you. I didn't know how far it went. I thought it was just image control. She taught all of us how to control, I said quietly, and how to be controlled. The silence that followed was heavy, but not cruel. It was the kind of silence that comes after years of noise when the truth finally settles in. Emma sniffed softly on the other end. I keep thinking about the baby, she said. I don't want to raise it like that. I don't want to be her. But I don't even know where to start. I don't have anyone. I felt something shift in me then, something quiet and sure. All my life I'd believed strength meant standing alone. But maybe real strength meant reaching out, not for validation, but for connection. You're not alone, I said. She laughed, small and uncertain. You don't mean that. I do, I said. You and we were both taught to keep quiet to play along. But it ends here. You can't fix what's broken in her, Emma. Neither can I, but we don't have to pass it on. The line went quiet. Then she whispered, Why are you being kind to me after everything I thought about that for a moment? The answer came softly. Because someone has to be. I heard her crying then. Not the loud, dramatic kind, but the quiet release of someone who hasn't felt safe enough to cry in years. I let her. There was nothing to say. When she finally spoke again, her voice was steadier. I don't know what to do next. You don't have to decide tonight, I said. Find a safe place. I'll help you figure it out. Brooke, she said, her voice trembling again, I can't take money from you. It's not about money, I said. It's about breaking a pattern. The sea outside was calm now, the waves whispering against the shore, like an old song. I thought about my father, about his letter, the one that had talked about protecting each other, about not letting love turn into a weapon. Maybe this was what he meant. Emma, I said quietly, when you have that baby, don't let her name be the only thing that defines her. Don't let fear teach her how to love. She didn't answer for a long time, and when she did, her voice was barely a whisper. I won't. We stayed on the phone a while longer, the silence between us slowly shifting from awkward to gentle. It felt strange, this peace born from the ashes of everything that had burned. When the call ended, I sat there for a long time staring out at the sea. The sky was filled with stars, and the air was soft and cool against my skin. Somewhere behind me, my phone buzzed again, another headline, another comment, another piece of noise. But I didn't look. For the first time, I didn't need the world to see what I'd done. I just needed to know I hadn't become what she was. I turned off the lamp, leaving the room lit only by moonlight. I thought of Emma somewhere on a lonely road, carrying both a secret and a promise. I hoped she could feel that something in the world had shifted, that the silence we'd both lived under was finally breaking. As I lay down, I whispered into the darkness, not sure if I was speaking to her, to myself, or to the memory of the girl I used to be. We both deserve a new beginning. When I said it, I thought I meant something simple, forgiveness maybe, or the quiet relief of walking away. But a few days later, as the wind began to gather over the Hawaiian coast, I realized that new beginnings never arrive gently. They come like weather, unpredictable, cleansing, and often terrifying. Emma's flight landed in the early evening just before the first low rumble of thunder. The airport was small, tucked between the mountains and the sea. And when she walked through the arrival gate, she looked like a ghost of the woman I remembered. Her hair was pulled back, her face pale, her eyes red from sleeplessness. Her hands rested protectively over her small, round belly, as though holding the last piece of safety she had left. Hi, she said quietly when she saw me. Hi, I replied, and for a long moment neither of us moved. Then I stepped forward and hugged her. She hesitated, then melted into my arms and began to cry small, broken sounds that had nothing to do with guilt or apology, just exhaustion. We drove along the coast in silence. The sky was streaked with copper light, the ocean restless, the air heavy with rain. When we reached the villa, Leilani was waiting at the door, her calm presence steady as always. She guided Emma inside, speaking softly, showing her to the guest room that smelled faintly of salt and hibiscus. That night we sat on the porch and ate a simple dinner of grilled fish and rice. The air was warm, but the wind was rising. Emma didn't say much, she just stared out at the horizon, where the first flashes of lightning blinked. It's strange, she said at last. Everything's falling apart, but this is the first time I felt I can breathe. That's what this place does, I said. It gives you space to start over. Her eyes filled again, but she smiled. Do you really think I can? I think we both can. She reached across the table, her fingers trembling, and squeezed my hand once before letting go. That simple gesture said more than any apology could. The next morning, the storm arrived in earnest. The sky turned grey, the sea rough and dark. The palms outside bent under the wind. The rain came first as a whisper, then as a roar hammering against the roof with a sound like endless applause. By noon, the island had shut down roads, closed phones flickering in and out. Leilani told us it would pass quickly, but the wind howled like it had waited years to speak. We lit candles as the power flickered their flames, and tongues bending and dancing in the drafts. Emma sat on the couch, her hands resting over her stomach, her face turbidly thoughtful. Do you ever think storms are alive? She asked suddenly. I smiled faintly. If they are, I think they come when we need them most. She nodded, and for a while we just listened the rain, the wind, the far-off growl of thunder. Then just as I started to relax, I heard her gasp. When I turned, she was doubled over, one hand clutching the armrest, her face pale as paper. Emma, it's happening, she whispered, her voice shaking. It's too soon. Panic flashed through me, but I forced it down. Okay, breathe. Sit down. She shook her head. The pain, Brooke, I can't. Yes, you can, I said, taking her hands. You're safe. I'm here. Leilani appeared in the doorway, calm, despite the chaos outside. The roads are closed, she said after one look at her phone. Ambulance won't get through. We'll have to do this here. A crack of thunder split the air so loud it rattled the windows. Rain swept sideways across the glass and the lights flickered out. For a heartbeat, we were in darkness, just the storm, the sound of Emma's breathing and the dim candlelight trembling on the walls. Tell me what to do, I said to Leilani. Her voice was steady. Boil water, bring towels. Keep her warm. I did as she said, moving fast, the old instincts of care taking over. I brought everything to the living room floor, where we laid Emma down on blankets. She was crying now, trying to stay composed, but shaking with pain. I knelt beside her and held her hand, whispering over and over, You can do this. Just breathe. You're safe. The storm raged outside, the wind screaming through the palms. Water leaked through the shutters, streaking down the walls. The candles flickered wildly, but none went out. Hours passed like that, minutes stretching and folding, time losing shape. Emma's cries rose, with each contraction, her grip on my hand fierce enough to leave marks. I didn't let go. When the pain peaked, she screamed a sound that cut through the storm itself. And then, through all that thunder and chaos, another sound broke free, soft, sharp, impossible, and perfect. A baby's cry. The world went silent. The thunder rolled one last time, distant now, as if retreating. The rain slowed to a steady, gentle rhythm. I looked at Leilani, who was smiling as she wrapped the tiny, red-faced baby in a towel. Emma collapsed back against the pillows, tears streaming down her face. She's here, she whispered. Oh God, she's here. Leilani placed the baby in her arms. For a moment, Emma just stared, her hands trembling. Then she began to laugh, a sound that broke and mended itself all at once. She's beautiful, I said softly, leaning closer. She's so small, Emma whispered, brushing a fingertip over the baby's cheek. So small and so strong. The baby made a small sound, half sigh, half breath, and the tiniest fingers reached up, curling around Emma's thumb. Outside, the wind had quieted. The clouds were thinning. The first light of dawn spilled through the window, pale and pink, touching the baby's skin like blessing. Leilani wiped her hands on a towel and looked at us with quiet pride. The storm has passed, she said. I exhaled slowly. Yes, I murmured. It has. Emma looked at me, then her eyes tired but clear. I couldn't have done this without you. You could have, I said, smiling faintly, but I'm glad you didn't have to. We sat there in silence watching the sky lighten. The ocean outside was calm again, smooth as glass. The air smelled of rain and earth and salt clean renewed. For a moment, I thought about everything that had brought us here, the lies, the manipulation, the grief, the silence. All of it seemed small now, washed away by something bigger, the miracle of survival, of life continuing, even after so much had been broken. Leilani began cleaning quietly, humming an old island song that rose and fell like the tide. I reached out and touched the baby's hand. Her skin was impossibly soft, her warmth grounding me in a way nothing else ever had. Emma looked down at her and then back at me. "What do I name her?" she asked. I smiled. "You'll know when you're ready." The baby stirred a tiny whimper that faded into sleep. The room glowed softly in the new morning light. Outside, the storm had left puddles that shimmered like mirrors, reflecting the sky now washed clean of darkness. Emma sighed, her body relaxing, her eyes closing. "She's safe now," she murmured. I looked down at the child, this small new heartbeat that had arrived in the middle of chaos and survived. For the first time, I didn't feel the weight of my family's past pressing on me. I didn't feel the need to prove anything to fix what couldn't be fixed. I placed my hand over Emma's and whispered, my voice steady, full of something that felt like peace. "She's safe now. And so am I." The morning after the storm felt unreal. The world outside had been stripped clean, no thunder, no wind, only a soft hush that lingered like reverence. The sea glittered beneath a pale sun, the sky washed clear of everything dark. Inside the villa, the air smelled faintly of salt and candle wax. Emma and the baby slept peacefully in the next room, and I sat by the window with a cup of tea cooling in my hands, listening to the rhythmic breathing of a house that had survived. For a few hours, everything was quiet. I told myself it would stay that way, but peace never lasts long when the truth has a life of its own. The first message came mid-morning, a news alert. I almost didn't look, but curiosity won. My name was there, bold and unmistakable. Whistleblower in Walsh family scandal. Identified Brooke Walsh breaks her silence. For a long moment, I just stared at it. My hands didn't shake, and I didn't feel panic, just a strange stillness, as if the ocean outside had paused to listen. I opened the article. They had everything: my statement to the journalist, my father's will, the forged documents. Photos of my mother at charity events, headlines about the investigation, screenshots of Jason's public apology. It was all there, perfectly arranged into a story that made sense now. At first, the comments were cruel. Who betrays their own family? Ungrateful daughter seeking attention. Why not handle it privately? But then the tide began to turn. People started quoting lines from the article, the part where I refused payment, the part where I said truth doesn't destroy families. Lies do. Someone wrote, "She's brave. It's not betrayal to expose what's wrong." Another, "She broke a silence that destroyed generations." I scrolled until I couldn't anymore. The world was speaking about me, and for the first time, I didn't feel small beneath its noise. Emma woke up in the afternoon. She came to the porch carrying the baby wrapped in a pale yellow blanket. The storm had left puddles across the yard, but the air was soft again, warm against the skin. She sat beside me, rocking gently. "She's been calm all morning," she said, "like she knows the world's different now." "It is," I said quietly. Emma looked out at the sea. "They're talking about you on TV," she said after a pause. "You knew this would happen, didn't you?" I nodded. "Eventually. The truth doesn't stay hidden forever." She smiled faintly. Jason called. I turned to her. "He did. He's trying," she said softly. "He told me he went on camera this morning, said everything you said was true, said you were the only one in the family who ever told the truth, even when no one listened." I let out a slow breath, a mix of relief and sadness. "He did that," Emma nodded. "He said he's done protecting lies, that it's time the family stopped pretending." For a moment, I couldn't speak. I'd imagined 1,000 versions of Jason's redemption, but not this quiet, dignified one. The one that didn't come from anger, but from understanding. He also said he wants to see the baby, she added. You should let him, I said. He deserves that chance. She nodded. Maybe. But I'm not rushing anything. She looked at me, her eyes soft but steady. I want her to grow up knowing truth isn't something to be afraid of. I smiled. Then she'll grow up stronger than any of us ever were. The baby stirred, then a tiny sound that felt like punctuation at the end of a long, hard sentence. Emma adjusted the blanket, her movements tender, almost reverent. The afternoon passed slowly, full of small, ordinary sounds, the waves, the baby's breathing, the far-off cry of seabirds. It felt like healing. Later, as the sun began to dip, my phone buzzed again. I almost ignored it, but the sender's name made me sit up. Robert Harris, my father's old lawyer. I answered, my voice calm. Mr. Harris. Miss Walsh, he said, his tone both warm and professional. I wanted to call you personally. After the news coverage, the district attorney's office reached out. They're reopening your father's estate case. I went still. Reopening, yes. The forged documents, the missing assets, the fraudulent transfers, it's all being re-examined. The original will is legally sound, and the signature discrepancies you identified are significant. This could lead to restitution of your inheritance. For a long moment, I didn't say anything. The wind outside had picked up slightly, the curtains shifting in the soft breeze. He continued, I know you never cared about the money, but what you did coming forward, it set things right, at least in part. Your father would have been proud. My throat tightened. Thank you, I said quietly. There's one more thing, he added. Your brother's statement helped. The court will likely consider his cooperation when proceedings begin. I smiled faintly. Good. He deserves a second chance. After we ended the call, I stayed seated for a while, letting the weight of everything settle. For so long, justice had felt like a word that belonged to other people, something unreachable. But now it felt closer. Not because I'd fought hard enough to win, but because I'd finally stopped fighting myself. Emma came out again, the baby asleep against her shoulder. Was that the lawyer? Yes, I said. They're reopening the case. She exhaled slowly, relief softening her features. That's good news, right? It's the right news, I said. We stood together in silence, watching the sky change colours. The horizon burned gold, then deepened into rose. The sea reflected it all, every shade, every change, every truth. Do you ever think about her? Emma asked after a while. My mother? She nodded. Sometimes, I admitted, but not the way I used to. I think of her like the storm. She destroyed things, yes, but she also forced what was weak to break, and what was strong to stay. Emma looked at me, her eyes full of quiet admiration. You sound at peace. I am, I said, and I meant it. We walked down toward the water, then our feet sinking into the cool sand. The ocean was calm again, the waves small and rhythmic. Emma stopped a few feet away from the edge, holding her daughter close. She'll never know that kind of pain, she said softly. I won't let her. I smiled, my gaze drifting to the horizon, where the sky met the sea. You don't have to. The cycle's already broken. She looked at me, then tears shining in her eyes, and for a moment, neither of us needed to say anything. The light was fading, but the tide was coming in. I watched it roll toward us, slow, deliberate, inevitable. The water brushed over my toes, cool and sure, like the world reminding me that everything moves forward, no matter how hard the past tries to hold it still. I turned to Emma, the sound of waves rising steady in my ears, and whispered the words that had carried me through everything. The tide's coming in. Those words stayed with me long after the waves had rolled over my feet and drawn back again. In the days that followed, everything began to move forward just as the ocean does slowly, steadily, without needing permission. When the court date finally came, I felt strangely calm. The air was crisp that morning, the sky pale blue, the kind of day my father used to call honest weather. I stood outside the courthouse, a modest building with white columns and salt-stained steps watching the reporters gather near the entrance. I wasn't nervous about facing them anymore. The story wasn't about shame or spectacle, now it was about truth, finding its place. Jason arrived a few minutes later. He looked tired but presentable, the sharpness gone from his face, replaced by something quieter. When our eyes met, he gave me a small nod. We didn't need to speak. We both knew why we were there. Inside the courtroom was small and bright. The hum of quiet voices filled the air, a mix of curiosity and formality. My mother sat at the far end of the room beside her attorney. She wore a beige suit and dark sunglasses, even though we were indoors. Her posture was perfect, her expression unreadable. It was the first time I had seen her since the scandal broke. For a fleeting second, I thought she might look at me. She didn't. The judge entered an older woman with silver hair and the kind of gaze that makes people tell the truth, even when they don't want to. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of finality. The court has reviewed the evidence in the matter of the Walsh estate. Documentation, witness statements, and handwriting analysis confirm that the signatures on the 2017 revision of Mr. Thomas Walsh's will were falsified. The original will, filed in 2012, is hereby reinstated. Her words were measured professional, but to me, they felt like thunder rolling through years of silence. The judge continued. Accordingly, the property at 214 Pine Hollow Lane, as well as the associated accounts, will be restored to the rightful heir, Ms. Brooke Walsh. I exhaled not in triumph, but in release. My heart didn't race. My hands didn't shake. It wasn't the surge of victory I had once imagined, it was something steadier, cleaner. Like a breath I had been holding since childhood finally let go. Across the room, my mother's lawyer whispered something to her. She didn't respond. Her hands were clasped tightly in her lap, the skin pale around her knuckles. I couldn't read her expression, but for the first time she looked small, like the power that had always surrounded her had quietly drained away. When the judge adjourned the session, Jason and I stepped outside together. The wind off the bay was sharp and cold, carrying the scent of salt and rain. The reporters were waiting their cameras, flashing, but we didn't stop to speak. We walked to the side steps where the noise faded into distance. He turned to me, his eyes red but clear. "It's done," he said. "Yes," I said softly. "It's done. I signed the transfer papers last night," he added. "The property's yours again. Legally. I wanted to make sure it was final before today." I nodded, feeling a wave of gratitude that words couldn't quite carry. "Thank you, Jason." He shook his head. "No, you don't have to thank me. It was never mine to begin with." There was a pause then, the kind that holds years of unspoken things. He looked out toward the water. "You know, I used to think Mum did everything out of love. That all the control, all the secrets, somehow made us stronger. She thought control was love, I said quietly. That's what destroyed her." He nodded, his jaw tightening. "She's lost everything now. The charities, her friends, the house. Nobody answers her calls anymore. She's staying in a small apartment near downtown. I visited once." "How was she?" He hesitated, angry, then sorry, then angry again. "She said I betrayed her, said you ruined her." I looked at the horizon where the sky met the sea, the colours soft and endless. "She ruined herself," I said. Jason was quiet for a while. "I don't hate her," he said finally, "but I can't go back. Neither can I." I said, "But we can go forward." He nodded, and for the first time in years, he smiled a real one, small but honest. Later that afternoon, we met at the lawyer's office for the formal signing. The building was simple, lined with framed photos of old clients and certificates. Mr. Harris greeted us with the warmth of someone who'd waited a long time to see something made right. He spread the documents across the polished oak table. "This confirms the transfer of ownership from Mr. Jason Walsh to Ms. Brooke Walsh," he explained. "All parties have reviewed and consented. Once signed, this becomes irrevocable. Jason picked up the pen first. He paused, then looked at me. You should have had this years ago, he said. I met his eyes. We both should have had the truth years ago. He signed his handwriting slow but firm. When he handed me the pen, I held it for a moment, feeling its weight. Then I signed beneath his name. Mr. Harris added his signature, stamped the document, and smiled. It's official, he said. Justice served. I stood feeling lighter than I had in years. Jason reached out his hand. I hesitated for only a moment before taking it. It wasn't a handshake between adversaries. It was something else, recognition perhaps, or forgiveness. Outside the sky had turned grey again, but it wasn't a storm, just weather moving through. We walked together down the courthouse steps, the wind tugging gently at our coats. Reporters shouted our names, but we didn't stop. We didn't need to explain anything anymore. When we reached the parking lot, Jason turned to me. Do you think she'll ever understand what she did? I thought about our mother alone in that apartment, still trying to control a story that had already been written without her. Maybe, I said, but it doesn't matter anymore. He nodded, eyes on the ground. I guess it doesn't. We stood there in silence, the wind carrying the scent of rain again. He looked up, meeting my gaze. For the first time since we were children, I saw the boy I used to protect, the one who'd never really wanted to be the golden son. She can't hurt us anymore, he whispered. I looked back toward the courthouse, then out at the open horizon, where the ocean stretched endlessly calm and unstoppable. For the first time in my life, I believed him. The words stayed with me long after Jason drove away. They lingered through the quiet ride home from the courthouse, through the soft hum of the ocean outside my villa, through the stillness that filled the nights that followed. For the first time, there was no fear beneath the silence, just space where pain used to live. And yet, something inside me remained unfinished. I had won justice, yes. I had found peace. But peace felt fragile, like a surface that could break if I looked too closely at what lay beneath it. Because even now, one person's voice still echoed in the corners of my mind. My mother's. I told myself it didn't matter anymore, that I had already walked away. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw the old house, the long driveway lined with oaks, the white shutters, the window of my father's study, where he used to wave goodnight. I saw her standing there too, composed, unshakable the way she'd always wanted to be seen. But I also saw what she'd become, a woman, trapped by her own lies, her hands trembling from the weight of everything she'd tried to control. 2 weeks after the court ruling, I drove back. It was late afternoon when I turned onto Pine Hollow Lane. The road was the same as it had always been, but quieter, as though even the trees remembered. The house came into view slowly, its paint faded, the garden overgrown. The porch rail sagged on one side, and the curtains inside hung limp and pale. It was hard to believe this was the same place where she'd once hosted fundraisers and holiday parties, where laughter had always felt rehearsed. I parked at the edge of the driveway and sat for a moment listening to the engine tick. The house looked smaller, now humbled somehow. When I finally stepped out, the air smelled of damp leaves and something faintly metallic, the scent of time itself. My footsteps on the gravel sounded too loud. The front door wasn't locked. It creaked when I pushed it open, the sound sharp in the empty air. Inside, dust floated through slanted light. The grand piano in the living room was covered with a sheet. Family photos still hung on the wall, but some frames were empty, their outlines darker than the wallpaper behind them. I walked slowly through the hallway, touching the banister, where my father's hand used to rest. The house was cold, though the day outside was warm. Every room felt smaller, shrunken by neglect. Then I heard it, a faint sound from the kitchen, the soft clink of a cup against a saucer. When I stepped inside, she was there. My mother sat at the kitchen table, wearing a cardigan I didn't recognise. Her hair, once carefully styled, was loose and grey around her face. She looked older, not just in the way the time changes people, but in the way guilt does. There were deep lines around her mouth and her shoulders curved inward, as if the world had become too heavy to carry upright. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. She looked up slowly, her eyes tired, watery. When she saw me, something flickered across her face. Surprise, fear, maybe even hope. "Brooke," she said at last, her voice rough with disuse. "You came." "Yes," I said quietly. She gestured toward the chair across from her. "Sit, please." I hesitated, then did. The table between us was bare except for a cup of tea still steaming faintly. "I didn't expect you," she said. "I know." She studied me for a moment, then looked down at her hands. They were thinner than I remembered the veins prominent beneath the skin. "You look well," she said softly. "Hawaii must agree with you." "It does," I said. Her lips twitched in a faint, weary smile. "I always thought you'd come back someday. I just didn't think it would be like this." I didn't answer. There was nothing to say. She looked around the kitchen, her gaze lingering on the empty shelves, the fading wallpaper. "It's strange," she murmured. "When the house was full, I never noticed how big it was. Now it just echoes." "You could fix it up," I said. "Sell it, move somewhere smaller." She gave a brittle laugh. "And go where Brooke who would want to see me now." Her voice cracked on the last word, and for a moment she looked fragile enough to disappear. "I heard about the court ruling," she said after a pause. "Congratulations." "It wasn't about congratulations," I replied. "No," she said quietly. "I suppose not." Silence stretched between us. The clock on the wall ticked softly, marking every second of a conversation we'd both avoided for a lifetime. Finally, she spoke again. "You must hate me." I looked at her, really looked, not at the woman who'd ruled our lives, but at the human being beneath the armor. "No," I said, "I don't." She frowned, confused. "You should." "I used to," I said, "but hate is just another way of holding on." Her eyes filled and she pressed a trembling hand to her mouth. "I just wanted to keep us perfect," she whispered. "That's all I ever wanted." I felt my throat tighten, but my voice stayed steady. "You didn't keep us perfect," I said softly. "You kept us afraid." She flinched as if the words themselves had weight. I thought if I could control everything she said after a moment, her voice breaking, if I could keep the family together, if I could make everyone look at us and see success, then maybe it would mean we were safe. That none of it, the loss, the weakness, would touch us. "And did it?" I asked. She shook her head slowly. "No, it destroyed everything." For the first time, she began to cry. Not the angry performative tears I'd seen before, but real ones. Her shoulders shook. She looked so small, so human, I almost couldn't bear it. "I don't know how to stop," she whispered through her hands. "I've lived my whole life trying to make everything right, and I don't know how to stop." I sat there watching her unravel, feeling a deep ache that wasn't pity and wasn't anger, something in between. The part of me that had longed for this moment, that had wanted her to understand, didn't feel vindicated. It just felt tired. I reached across the table and laid my hand over hers. Her skin was cold. For a moment she didn't move. Then slowly she turned her palm upward and gripped my hand back. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was something close, the smallest beginning of what forgiveness might someday become. Outside, the last light of afternoon touched the windows spilling across the floor. The house creaked as if exhaling. My mother looked at me, her eyes red and wet. "I don't know how to stop," she said again, her voice barely a whisper, breaking apart in the air between us. I sat there for a long time after the hat, holding her hand, the silence between us thick with all the years we could never reclaim. She didn't say anything else, and neither did I. The house creaked softly, the kind of sound that made it feel almost alive, like it too was trying to breathe after years of holding itself rigid. When I finally stood to leave, she didn't stop me. She just nodded once, as if she understood that I had forgiven her in the only way I could, by no longer needing anything from her. Outside, the sky was grey, heavy with the promise of rain. As I walked toward my car, I felt lighter than I had in years. Not because anything had been fixed, but because I no longer needed it to be. For the first time since I was a child, the weight of my family's story wasn't pressing against my shoulders. It was behind me, fading with every step. 2 days later, I received a call from Miss Harris, my father's old lawyer. His voice was steady, warm, but there was something unusual in his tone. "Miss Walsh," he said, "could you come by my office? There's something your father wanted you to have. It's long overdue." I agreed, without hesitation. When I arrived that afternoon, the sun had broken through the clouds, painting the office in soft, golden light. The smell of old books and polished wood filled the room. Mr. Harris greeted me with that same gentle professionalism he'd always had, but his eyes were softer now, touched by something like reverence. He motioned for me to sit, then opened a small safe behind his desk. From it, he took out a worn brown envelope sealed with a faded blue ribbon. My father's name was written across it in his careful slanted handwriting. "I didn't know he'd written this until recently," Mr. Harris said quietly. "It was among the original estate documents. He asked that it only be given to you once the estate matters were fully resolved." I stared at the envelope for a long moment before taking it. My hands trembled as I turned it over. The paper was fragile, the ink slightly smudged with time. It felt like holding a piece of the past that had been waiting patiently to be seen. "Thank you," I said softly. He nodded. "I'll give you privacy." He left me alone in the office, closing the door behind him. For a while, I couldn't bring myself to open it. I traced my father's handwriting with my fingertips, remembering the way he used to write grocery lists, in that same looping script, or the notes he'd leave for me in the mornings, breakfasts in the fridge. "Don't forget your sketchbook. Simple words full of care." Finally, I broke the seal. Inside was a folded letter, yellowed at the edges. "My dearest Brooke, if you are reading this, it means that I am no longer there to say what should have been said long ago. It also means that you have found your way through the noise, as I always believed you would. I know you've lived in the shadow of things you did not create. I know how quiet you've had to become just to survive. And I know that silence can be both a shield and a wound." As I read, my throat tightened. His voice was in every line calm, kind, certain. "There is something I must tell you." I knew. Not everything, perhaps, but enough. I knew about the false signatures, the accounts, the lies. I saw your mother drowning in her need for control, and I watched as it began to pull you down too. I told myself I was protecting you by staying silent. I thought that if I gave her time, she would find her way back to reason. But I was wrong. I pressed a hand to my mouth, tears spilling before I could stop them. When I realised how far things had gone, I had already become too weak to fight her. I thought perhaps the truth would surface naturally. I thought it would rise the way the tide does, slow, steady, inevitable. I prayed that when it did, you would be the one strong enough to face it without becoming bitter. I could almost hear his voice, the soft rhythm of it, patient and wise. I was not brave enough to confront her, but I hoped that one day you would be brave enough to forgive her. Not for her sake, but for your own. Because forgiveness, my girl, is not about erasing what was done. It's about freeing yourself from the weight of it. My tears fell freely, now blurring the ink. There is something else I need you to understand. You come from the same sea that shaped her and me and everyone before us. The storm may be part of it, but so are the tides. Be the tide, Brooke. Be the tide that heals, not the storm that breaks. The world has enough storms already. I loved you more than I ever said. I see you even now, strong, steady, unshaken by the wind. That is how I will always remember you. With all my heart, Dad. I set the letter down, my hand shaking, the tears falling silently onto the wooden desk. The room seemed to hum with the echo of his words. I hadn't realised until that moment how much I still needed to hear his voice, how much I had missed his quiet certainty in a world that had been loud with lies. I leaned back in the chair, closing my eyes. For years I had blamed him for his silence, for letting my mother's manipulation consume everything. But now, reading his letter, I understood. His silence wasn't cowardice, it was hope. hope that truth would rise on its own. And it had, just not the way he expected. When Mr. Harris returned, he didn't speak right away. He just watched me quietly, giving me time. He wrote that, not long before he passed, he said finally, "He must have known how hard things would get." I nodded, wiping my face. He did. He hesitated, then said, "There's something else." He opened the safe again and took out another envelope nearly identical to mine. "Your brother received a letter too. It was sealed the same day as yours." I looked at the second envelope, my heart tightening. For a moment, I couldn't speak. "Did Jason... has he read it?" I asked. Mr. Harris shook his head. "Not yet. He's coming tomorrow." I stared at the envelope in his hand, thinking of my brother's face at the courthouse, the way his voice had trembled when he said our mother couldn't hurt us anymore. Whatever was inside that letter, I knew it would matter. Maybe it would finish what my father had started. Maybe it would heal what still needed healing. I stood folding my own letter carefully and pressing it to my chest. "Thank you," I said again. Mr. Harris smiled gently. "He always believed in you, Brooke. I think he knew you'd be the one to bring everything back to shore." As I left his office, the sky outside was streaked with colour, soft oranges and blues, the kind of light that only comes at the edge of evening. I held the letter close as I walked to my car. The words replayed in my mind over and over. "Be the tide that heals, not the storm that breaks." For the first time I understood what my father had meant. The tide doesn't destroy, it cleanses. It doesn't rage, it restores. And sometimes it carries things home that were thought to be lost forever. I looked toward the horizon, the faint line where the sea met the sky, and whispered, "I'll try, Dad." But even as I said it, one question lingered, one that felt like the beginning of another truth waiting to surface. Because Mr. Harris's words still echoed in my ears. "Your brother received a letter too." Those words stayed with me long after I left Mr. Harris's office. They followed me through the drive home, the wind curling through the open window, the late sun gilding the horizon. I thought about the envelope sitting somewhere with Jason's name on it, waiting for him to open it, waiting to finish a story that had begun long before either of us understood the parts we were playing in it. I wondered if our father had known what he was asking of us when he wrote those letters, not vengeance, not vindication, but something far harder. Grace. A week later, Jason called. His voice was calm, different, somehow grounded like the ocean after a long storm. "I read Dad's letter," he said simply. I waited, and he took a breath. He said some of the same things he told you, I think. About silence, about truth finding its way home. He said he was proud of you, of us, and that we needed to stop fighting the tide and start moving with it. There was a pause. I could hear him swallow. He asked me to bring everyone together one last time. Not for him, for us. I didn't need to ask who everyone meant. 2 days later, we gathered at the community hall on the edge of town, a small place that had once hosted charity dinners and school concerts. It smelled faintly of old wood and coffee. The same people who had once whispered behind our backs now sat quietly in folding chairs, their faces drawn expectant. I hadn't wanted a crowd, but Jason said it felt right that our family story had played out in public for too long to end behind closed doors. My mother arrived last. She was thinner than before, her posture still straight, but without the steel it once held. She wore a simple grey dress and no jewellery. When she saw me, she stopped as though uncertain whether she was allowed to approach. I gave a small nod. It was enough. Jason stood at the front of the room, a single microphone before him. He looked out over the small audience, then at me. I gave him a quiet look of encouragement. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out an envelope identical to mine. The paper trembled slightly in his hands. This, he began, his voice steady but low, was our father's last letter. He wrote it to me, but I think he meant it for all of us. He unfolded the paper carefully, his eyes flicking once to where our mother sat in the second row. Then he began to read. My son, if you are holding this letter, It means the truth has finally come to light. I don't know what that truth looks like or how much damage it has done, but I know that the only way forward will be through honesty and humility. You have your mother's strength and my stubbornness. Use them both wisely. The world will tempt you to protect what looks perfect, but perfection is a lie. Only love, real flawed human love, can last. Jason's voice cracked slightly, but he kept reading. Your sister has always understood that even when no one listened to her, one day, when the noise fades, you will see her the way I do, not as your rival, but as the heart of what's best in us. She is the anchor you will need when everything else drifts. I felt my throat tighten, the tears threatening again. Around us, the room had gone still. Even the faint hum of the overhead lights seemed to fade. I don't ask you to make amends for me or your mother. That's not your burden to carry. But I do ask this: when the time comes, tell the truth. All of it. Don't hide behind what's polite or easy. The truth will cost you, but it will set you free. I promise you that. With love and faith, Dad. Jason lowered the paper slowly, his shoulders trembling. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then, from somewhere near the back, came the sound of someone quietly crying. It took me a moment to realize it was my mother. She stood shakily, one hand clutching the chair in front of her. Her face was pale, her eyes red-rimmed. He knew, she said softly. He knew everything, and he still believed we could be better. Her voice broke. I don't deserve that. Jason set the letter down and went to her, but she stepped back, shaking her head. No. Let me say this. The room was utterly silent. Even the air seemed to wait. I spent my life trying to protect an image, she said, her words trembling. I thought if I could make our family look perfect, no one would see how frightened I really was of losing control, of being ordinary, of being unloved. And in doing that, I hurt the very people who loved me most. Her gaze found mine then. Brooke, she said, her voice barely holding together. You were the one thing I couldn't control, and I punished you for it. You were honest. You were good, and I made that seem like a flaw. I am so sorry. The tears came before I could stop them. Not the bitter kind, not anymore. Just the kind that come when something heavy finally lifts. I walked toward her slowly. The years between us, the shouting, the silence, the cold distance seemed to dissolve with each step. When I reached her, she began to cry, openly, her body shaking. I don't expect you to forgive me, she whispered. I just needed you to know I see it now. I see what I did. I took her hands. They were cold and fragile but familiar. I know, I said quietly, and I forgive you, not because what you did was right, but because I don't want to carry it anymore. Her breath hitched. She pressed her forehead against mine the way she used to when I was a child and had scraped my knee. For the first time in my adult life, she held me, not as a possession, not as proof of anything, but as her daughter. There was a stillness then that filled the room. It wasn't the silence of fear anymore. It was the kind that follows truth, deep, fragile and sacred. Then slowly someone began to clap. It was Leilani standing near the back, her eyes shining. One by one, others joined her, Jason, Emma. Even some of the reporters who had once written headlines about us. The sound was soft, hesitant at first, then stronger, fuller. Not applause for performance, but for release. For the kind of courage that doesn't look like victory, but peace. My mother wept harder, then her shoulders shaking with the weight of it all, and I held her. When the applause faded, Jason stepped forward. His eyes were wet, his face streaked with tears. He reached for my hand and squeezed it, his voice low but clear enough for everyone to hear. You were the best of us all along, he said, and for the first time, I let myself believe it might be true. Those words lingered in me long after the applause faded and the lights in the hall dimmed. They followed me home like a quiet echo, wrapping around the spaces of my mind that used to hold bitterness. For years I had carried my family's story like a stone heavy cold, immovable. Now, for the first time, it felt like something softer, like water. The months that followed were quiet, but not empty. The court case was over, the house was mine, and the family name, for better or worse, had settled into a new kind of peace. Jason visited often sometimes with Emma and the baby. My mother called occasionally, her voice fragile but sincere. I didn't always answer right away, but when I did, our conversations were gentle, almost shy. The past didn't disappear, but it stopped defining every word between us. The house on Pine Hollow Lane stood empty for a while. I visited it every week, walking through its rooms, breathing in the silence. The walls still carried ghosts, the echoes of arguments, the chill of unspoken things. But under it all, there was something else too potential. I could feel it, like a pulse waiting to return to life. One morning, as I stood in what used to be my father's study, sunlight streaming through the dusty window panes, I heard his words again from the letter he'd left me. Be the tide that heals, not the storm that breaks. I realised then that keeping the house for myself would only make it a monument to the past, but transforming it, giving it purpose again, could turn it into something alive, something healing. It started small. A few calls, some meetings, a late-night sketch of what I wanted it to become. Within a month, I had a plan the house would reopen as a transitional home for women starting over, women leaving broken marriages, recovering from loss, or finding their footing after years of being unseen. I named it The Haven at Hollow Lane. Renovation began in early spring. The grand piano that had once been covered in dust was moved to the living room again, freshly tuned. The walls were painted in soft colours, cream pale blue, sunlight yellow. I had the locks changed not to keep people out, but to mark the beginning of something new. Where portraits of my family once hung, we placed paintings made by local artists, women telling their stories through colour and texture. The upstairs rooms became small but warm bedrooms, each one with a handmade quilt and a vase of fresh flowers. The day the first residents arrived, I felt nervous, like I was stepping onto a stage I hadn't rehearsed for. There were 5 women in total different ages, different stories, each one carrying her own kind of silence. We spent that first evening around the dining table sharing coffee and quiet introductions. One woman, Claire, was a teacher who had lost her job and her home after a messy divorce. Another, Lila, was barely 20 and had left a controlling boyfriend with nothing but a backpack. There was laughter that night, hesitant at first, then freer. The house felt lighter with every sound. It was a few weeks later when Leilani came to visit. I hadn't seen her since Hawaii, though we'd kept in touch through the occasional phone call. She arrived on a mild afternoon, the air thick with the smell of fresh paint and blooming gardenias. When she stepped out of her car, wearing her usual wide-brimmed hat and calm smile, it felt as if a piece of the ocean had followed her all the way here. I had to see it for myself, she said, looking up at the restored house. It's beautiful, Brooke. It's still finding its rhythm, I said, smiling. Like me. We walked through the house together. She touched the walls gently as though feeling the stories beneath the new paint. In the kitchen, she paused by the window, her gaze distant. This kitchen, she murmured. I know it. I frowned slightly. You've been here before. She nodded slowly, her eyes soft with memory. Years ago, long before you were grown. She turned to me, her expression both wistful and tender. I worked for your father once as a housekeeper back when my own life had fallen apart. I felt a small shock of recognition, like a puzzle piece sliding into place. You knew him, Leilani smiled. Oh yes. He found me at the church down the road scrubbing floors for extra pay. He hired me the same day and told me, you can't build a new life if you're starving. He gave me a room here in that little space off the kitchen. It wasn't much, but it was safe. And he treated me with kindness, not pity, just kindness. He used to say this house should always be a place where people could start again. I felt a lump form in my throat. He never told me that. She reached out and squeezed my hand. He didn't need to. He knew you'd find your way back to it when you were ready. We sat at the table where my family had once eaten in brittle silence. Now it was covered in drawings from the women's art class, half-empty coffee cups, and the smell of cinnamon from a loaf cooling on the counter. "I thought I was helping you when we met in Hawaii," Leilani said after a while, her voice gentle. "But really, I was just finishing what your father started. He helped me when I had nothing. I only wanted to return his kindness." I couldn't speak. My throat ached with the weight of everything those words carried. Generations of kindness passed quietly from one heart to another. I looked around the room again, at the women laughing softly in the next room, at the sunlight spilling across the worn wooden floor. "He was right," I said finally. "The truth always finds its way home." Leilani smiled, her eyes glimmering. "Yes, and now it's your turn." "My turn?" I asked softly. She stood, her movements slow but graceful. "Your father was the tide that lifted me. I was the tide that helped bring you back to yourself. And now, Brooke," she paused, her hand resting lightly on my shoulder, "now it's your turn to be the tide." Outside, the wind stirred the trees, carrying the scent of rain and new beginnings. I looked through the window and saw the first women of the haven planting flowers in the front garden, their laughter rising with the breeze. The ocean wasn't far, I could almost hear it in the distance, constant and steady. And for the first time, I realized that peace wasn't about stillness at all. It was about movement, quiet, steady, unstoppable. Like the tide. Those words stayed with me in the days that followed, echoing softly in my mind as the life I had built settled into a calm rhythm. The haven was alive now, truly alive. Mornings began with the smell of coffee and the laughter of women who had once been afraid to speak too loudly. The sound of hammers and renovation had been replaced by something gentler, footsteps on clean floors, the hum of quiet conversation, a child's laugh echoing down the hall. It was the sound of renewal. I had never imagined the old house could hold so much light. The same walls that had once contained so much control and silence now carried warmth. I watched women unpack their few belongings, fill the rooms with music and colour, and little by little I saw the house transform into something my father would have been proud of. It was no longer a monument to our family's perfection. It was a home for starting over, for learning that broken things could still be beautiful. And yet, even amid all that peace, something inside me felt unfinished. Healing, I've learned, isn't a single moment of clarity. It's a tide that comes and goes. Sometimes it pulls you backward before it carries you forward again. I had forgiven my mother. I had rebuilt what was lost. But there was still one thing I hadn't done, I hadn't let go. One evening, after the last light had faded from the windows and the women had gone to their rooms, I found myself sitting alone in my father's old study. The desk was bare now except for one thing, the letter he'd written me, the one that had carried me through everything. The paper was soft from being unfolded so many times. I read it again, tracing each familiar line. "Be the tide that heals, not the storm that breaks." The words were as steady as ever, but this time they seemed to whisper something new. "You've healed others, Brooke. Now it's time to heal yourself." Outside, the wind carried the faint sound of the ocean. It was calling me not as escape, but as return. I took the letter and stepped out into the night. The air was cool, the sky streaked with the last pinks and purples of sunset. The path to the shore was lined with wildflowers, now planted by the women who lived at the haven. Their petals brushed my legs as I walked, soft and fragrant like a blessing. The beach was nearly empty when I reached it. The tide was coming in slow and deliberate, washing over the sand in gentle sighs. The air smelled of salt and memory. I slipped off my shoes and walked toward the edge, feeling the cool water touch my toes. For a while, I just stood there, the waves curling around my feet, and thought about how far I had come. I remembered the girl I used to be, the one who waited for invitations that never came, who mistook silence for safety. I remembered the woman who fled to Hawaii because it was easier to leave than to be left out again. And I remembered the daughter who finally faced the truth and found her father's voice waiting for her on the other side of it. From my pocket, I took the letter. I held it in both hands, the paper trembling slightly in the breeze. It had been my compass for so long, my map through every storm. But I knew now that I didn't need to carry it anymore. The lessons were already in me. I tore a small piece from one corner, just enough to fold. The rest I tucked back into my coat close to my heart. Kneeling in the sand, I folded the torn piece, carefully, turning it into a tiny paper boat. My hands moved slowly, reverently, the way my father once folded receipts into little squares when he was thinking. The boat wasn't perfect. Its edges were uneven, the paper soft and thin. But it would float. I walked to where the water met the sand and knelt again, placing the little boat onto the surface of a shallow wave. For a moment, it hesitated, swaying between coming and going. Then, the tide caught it, and it began to drift away, small, fragile, but steady. "I love you," I whispered. "And I forgive you, all of you." The paper boat rocked gently, catching the light of the setting sun. The gold shimmered on its tiny surface before it floated farther out, carried by the rhythm of the sea. I watched it until it became a speck, then disappeared completely into the endless expanse. The waves rolled in, washing over where I'd knelt, erasing the marks I'd left in the sand. I stayed there for a long time, letting the water touch my hands, my knees, my soul. The world felt impossibly wide and endlessly kind. In that quiet, my father's voice seemed to rise from the rhythm of the waves, not in words, but in feeling. It was the same lesson he had left behind, only now I understood it in full. Forgiveness isn't about excusing what's been done. It's about setting yourself free from it. It's choosing to live without the weight. As I stood, the wind brushed against my face, cool and soft. The sea stretched before me, glowing with the last fire of sunset. Each wave that reached the shore whispered something, not goodbye, but continue. I began to walk along the shoreline, the surf rolling at my ankles. The sand was cool beneath my feet, firm where the tide had smoothed it. Every step felt lighter than the one before. I thought of the women sleeping back at the haven of their stories, the bruises that would fade, the fears that would loosen their grip with time. I thought of Jason, finding his way back to being a good man of Emma and the baby of my mother, trying to learn what it meant to live without control. For the first time, I didn't feel responsible for any of them. I simply felt connected, not by duty, but by understanding. As I reached the curve of the beach where the rocks began, I stopped and turned back. The sky had darkened into deep indigo, and the first star had appeared faint and distant, but steady. The sea was darker now too, but alive with silver reflections from the fading light. In that moment, I realized something simple and true. The tide never really leaves. It pulls away only to return. That's what forgiveness is, not erasing what was, but allowing it to come and go without drowning in it. I closed my eyes and let the sound of the waves fill me. My father's voice seemed to blend with the sea, and for the first time, I felt him not as someone lost, but as something present, a current beneath everything quiet and constant. When I opened my eyes again, I saw something small bobbing on the horizon. For a heartbeat, I thought it might be my little paper boat, catching the last glimmer of sunlight before it was swallowed by the sea. Maybe it wasn't. Maybe it didn't matter. What mattered was that it had gone where it was meant to go. I stood there until the sun finally slipped beneath the water, leaving the world in that soft in-between of dusk, neither day nor night, just possibility. The air grew cooler, the wind stronger, the tide creeping closer. I smiled because I understood it now. This was how life worked. Everything that leaves eventually returns, changed but whole. As I turned to walk back toward the path, the ocean surged. One last time, the foam curling over my footprints before pulling them away. The sand behind me was smooth again, untouched, ready for whatever came next. I looked out at the vast, darkening water and whispered more to myself than anyone else. Forgiveness isn't weakness, it's peace. The wind carried the words away, mingling them with the sound of the sea. I took a deep breath, the air cool and alive in my lungs. And as I began to walk back home, I felt something shift, not an ending, but a beginning, so quiet and certain that it could only belong to the sea. The waves shimmered in the fading light, rising and falling, their rhythm eternal. And as the tide reached for the shore one last time that evening, I smiled through tears and whispered the words that felt like the closing of a circle. The truth I had waited all my life to understand. Some tides wash away pain, others bring you home. And that is how my story found its peace. The tide returned not to take something away, but to bring me home to forgiveness, to freedom, to myself. If you've been watching this far, maybe something in my story touched a part of yours. Maybe you faced a silence that felt too heavy, or a storm that seemed impossible to survive. I want you to remember this. You are stronger than what tried to break you. Healing doesn't happen all at once. It moves like the tide, slow, steady, and always returning. If this story spoke to you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever had to let go of something or someone to find peace again? What did your tide bring back to you? Share your story in the comments. I read everyone, and your words might help someone else who needs them tonight. And if you'd like to hear more stories about life, family, and second chances, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Every week, we bring you true tales of resilience and renewal that remind us all that no matter how strong the storm, the tide always finds its way home.